Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the October 12th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council meeting. We are continuing to be masked indoors. We appreciate everybody helping us in that endeavor. As is usual, we will begin our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Jose.
Here.
Commissioner Wallace.
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Here.
Commissioner Colavani.
Here.
Commissioner Gilmartin.
Here.
Commissioner Glover.
Here. Thank you. Is there a motion concerning minutes of previous council meetings?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the October 5th, 2021 minutes as presented.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the council on those minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 4 on our agenda tonight, we have a couple of proclamations. We will start this evening with American Pharmacists Month. I think we have some folks from Midwestern University here. Welcome. Whereas pharmacy is one of the oldest of the health professions concerned with the health and well-being of all people. And whereas the first celebration of National Pharmaceutical Week was held from October 11th through October 17th, 1925, when radio stations across the country broadcast special programs emphasizing the professional side of pharmacy. Whereas in 2004, American Pharmacists Month was launched to allow more time to promote the expanding role of the pharmacist. Whereas there are over 315,000 pharmacists licensed in the United States providing services to assure the rational and safe use of all medications. Whereas pharmacists are specifically educated with a focus and level of expertise on medication therapy that exceeds that of other healthcare providers and are ideally suited to work collaboratively with other healthcare providers and patients to improve medication use and outcomes by providing services through medication therapy and management. Whereas during the COVID-19 epidemic, pharmacists have stepped up and continued to provide direct patient care, playing a crucial role in supporting patients during unprecedented challenges to our healthcare system and access. Whereas the American Pharmacists Association and the Illinois Pharmacists Association have declared October as American Pharmacists Month. Whereas Downers Grove's own Midwestern University, Chicago College of Pharmacy, graduates approximately 200 qualified pharmacists yearly who go on to enter the healthcare system and practice patient-centered care. Now therefore, I, Robert T. Barnett, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim October 21st, October 2021 as American Pharmacists Month in the Village of Downers Grove, and urge all citizens to acknowledge the valuable services of pharmacists, provide safe, affordable, and beneficial pharmaceutical care services and products to all citizens, and encourage all to take a moment to simply say thank you to your pharmacist. Dated this 12th day of October 2021, Downers Grove, Illinois. If you guys would come on down, we'll hand this off.
Mayor Barnett, Commissioners, and residents of Downers Grove. On behalf of the American Pharmacists Association, Academy of Student Pharmacists at the Midwestern University College of Pharmacy, I thank you for proclaiming October as American Pharmacists Month in the Village of Downers Grove. The purpose of this proclamation is to recognize the service of pharmacists to the community. Pharmacists are the most accessible healthcare professional and can provide health screenings, immunizations, and medication therapy management, among many other services. As medication experts, pharmacists reduce the number of people who end up in the hospital, provide the best therapy recommendations for those who do end up hospitalized, decrease medication-related errors, and improve patient outcomes. With the release of the COVID-19 vaccines, pharmacists have played a crucial role in administering the vaccines and providing education to the communities. While still amid the COVID-19 pandemic, our organization knows providing continuous care for our patients is important. We continue to operate our drive-through clinics while utilizing the indoors when needed. In these clinics, we provide blood pressure and blood glucose screenings, as well as lifestyle and medication counseling. Our organization recently teamed up with our university's College of Psychiatric and Neurological Pharmacists chapter to fulfill the unmet need of healthcare at Morningstar Mission. Morningstar Mission is a homeless mission that helps the residents develop skills to productively re-enter society. This mission provides a lot of different resources, but it lacks healthcare resources. This gives our organizations the opportunity to provide health screenings, mental health resources, and medication education and counseling. Our first event was held last month, and we will be going back in January. Our goal is to increase our presence to once a month so the residents have consistent health care. As student pharmacists, we are humbled by the care we are able to provide to our community, and we are excited to continue our work as future pharmacists. Thank you.
Thank you. Another proclamation this evening. This concerns Arts Month, Dupage. Whereas the arts are the embodiment of all things beautiful, emotional, and entertaining in the world, an ever-present and enduring yet growing and evolving record and reflection of the human experience, defining personal, local, and national achievements and challenges. Whereas the arts have often shed light, focus, and awareness on the most valuable of society, the most vulnerable of society, and those issues which bind us in the moment. Whereas through the arts, we explore what it means to be human, illuminate our inner lives, enrich our emotional world, and teach compassion. Whereas art has the power to facilitate social interactions, raise mutual understanding of those experiences that make us unique, and bring people and ideas together. Whereas art has time and again proving a comfort in crisis, an outlet in adversity, and a bridge to peace. Whereas the month of October has been recognized as Arts Dupage Month by Arts Dupage and the arts and cultural organizations in the community of Dupage County. Whereas the arts enhance every aspect of life in Downers Grove, playing a unique and intrinsically valuable role in the lives of our residents. Now therefore, I, Robert T. Barnett, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim October 2021 as Arts Dupage Month and call upon all citizens to seek, engage, celebrate, and promote the arts in the Village of Downers Grove. Dated this 12th day of October 2021, Downers Grove, Illinois. With that, we will move on to public comments portion of our meeting. This portion of our meeting is reserved for public comment on items not on tonight's agenda. So if you have a subject that you want to talk about, ask us about, or an issue you want to raise that is not on tonight's agenda, please come on down to the podium. A couple of things to keep in mind. This applies to the balance of the public comment session on agenda items later. Please state your name for the record. We like to know who we're talking to. Try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. There's no need to repeat what others have said. Oftentimes we have sort of a rotating repeat of the same phrase. We are all listening up here and trying to take it all in, so you don't have to repeat what somebody else has said. Remember, this is an opportunity to be heard. It's not an ongoing debate. And sometimes when questions are asked, we may have to defer and answer those questions later, getting more information ourselves. So if anybody has something not on tonight's agenda they want to talk about, please come on down to the podium.
Good evening, Council. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I speak during public comment this evening for two reasons. The first concerns the consent agenda. While one can submit an electronic remark applicable to an item on the consent agenda, this Council essentially ignores such remarks regardless of the reason they're submitted. I will have more to say about the remarks shortly. As far as I can tell from the way council meetings are conducted, this council does not allow for public to comment on items on the consent agenda before it votes. Therefore, I must use this time during public comment to speak about what I contend is a flagrant abuse of power by the village council. I speak specifically of village council's putting an agreement with EDC on the consent agenda without any prior public discussion, on the pretext the agreement is pro forma and need not be given the usual multi-step deliberation. EDC is an entity of the council's own creation and is totally dependent on it for its funding. In that vein, to claim EDC is a public-private operation is undercut by EDC's own data. With only 1% of Downers Grove businesses find EDC worthy of even token financial support, calling it a partnership suggests again the extent to which Village Council and EDC is willing to adulterate the meanings of words. The agreement under consideration appears impressive in its expectations, but should any credence be given to it? Has Village Council held EDC to any measurable standards up till now? When EDC presents its quarterly reports, Council's probing is with kid gloves. The verbal exchange tends to be mutually fawning for obvious reasons, and the public is consigned to watching. Council intends to commit to 10 years of paying for an entity for which no demonstrable proof of entity's value exists. Council instead proclaims to residents, trust us, is for your own property tax paying good. Really? Where's the data? Council relies on public disinterest and the opportunistic abuse of power to sustain the credibility of that claim. The abuse of power is particularly significant in light of council and the village manager's related deception regarding their use of sales tax rebates and the clawback provisions written into these agreements with the enterprises council is trying to entice to locate or remain in Downers Grove. The Art Van debacle exposed the reality of the clawback's impotence quite dramatically. In looking for the current contractual agreement between council and EDC, which I could not find on council's website, by the way, I stumbled onto an agreement council made with DeVry for a 15-year rebate arrangement with clawbacks. DeVry left in year 10 for Naperville. Did the clawback provision work any better in that instance, or was that swept quietly under the rug? This council offers systematic data showing the extent to which such incentive arrangements are actually working or not. Not that I'm aware of. Perhaps the most deceptive of all is council and EDC's ongoing failure to acknowledge the better than expected economic performance and associated tax collections since the start of the pandemic are due entirely to the extraordinary measures taken by the federal government and the nation's central bank, actions that sustain consumption in communities like Downers Grove. Without those steps, pessimistic expectations would have been more than met. But alas, those extraordinary steps have simply shifted in time and level of government when and by whom taxes must be collected to pay for the largesse. To be ignorant of that fact is to set oneself up for yet another unwelcome surprise of the magnitude seen in 2008 and 2020. Finally, it need to be said that the notion of environmental sustainability is nowhere to be found in EDC's big plans for the future or the metrics by which its work is to be assessed. I presume, therefore, EDC has no more clue than the council has about what the goal really entails as it applies to economic activity. Of course, months ago I asked as an empirical question, is capitalism compatible with environmental sustainability? The mayor responded with the vague non sequitur, capitalism can always do better. Do we see the EDC's work or this proposed contract any evidence? The mayor, village council, and village manager trying to motivate the enterprises of Downers Grove to do better? Not that I could see. Why not? Because village council's reliance on increasing sales tax revenue and rising property values to generate increasing property tax revenue is anti-environmental sustainability to the core. For these and other reasons, I urge you to remove the proposed agreement from this meeting's consent agenda so that it may be given the public scrutiny and discussion it deserves. My second reason for speaking is to urge council to re-examine and
Hey,
approve.
David, reason one took you 5 minutes and 27 seconds, so you got to wrap it up.
Let me just quickly say this then. My second reason for speaking is to urge Village Council to re-examine and improve its handling of electronic remarks. These are encouraged on the Council's current meeting listing of the agenda as an alternative to making public comment, but the way in which they're handled subsequently leaves them far from handled in that fashion. I'll leave the details as another submission to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on subjects not on tonight's agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will continue with our consent agenda. A motion concerning the consent agenda.
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda passes unanimously. Takes us to item 8, our active agenda. This is the portion of the meeting where we plan to act on subjects previously discussed, sometimes at the last meeting, sometimes at multiple meetings. There will be additional opportunity for public comment at each of these items as well. Is there a motion concerning a plat of subdivision?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt a resolution approving the final plat of subdivision for 2751, 2761 Ogden Avenue as presented.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the audience on this item? Council comments or questions? No? Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion concerning ordinance designations on Ogden Avenue?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the Village of Downers Grove, Illinois, to designate the property at 2751, 2761 Ogden Avenue as Planned Unit Development Number 65, and authorize a hotel and restaurant development as presented.
Second.
Any audience comments or questions? Continuing theme on Ogden Avenue. Council comments or questions? Rosa, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that too passes unanimously. Is there an ordinance concerning rezoning on Ogden Avenue?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an ordinance rezoning certain property located at 2751 to 2761 Ogden Avenue as presented.
Second.
The audience, again, not a lot of interest in this one. Council comments or questions? Before we do call the roll, for those watching at home or those tonight who are wondering, what is all this nonsense where people don't even ask any questions? These are, as we mentioned before, subjects we've had at least one, sometimes 2 or 3 meetings on. Sometimes they are part of things like economic development plans, which do extend over a period of time and are often talked about at multiple settings. Rosa, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that too passes unanimously. Is there an ordinance authorizing a special use on Ogden Avenue?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an ordinance authorizing a special use for Lot 2 of the Ogden and Walnut re-subdivision to permit a restaurant with drive-through as presented.
Second.
Last chance. Council comments or questions? Rosa, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion concerning an agreement with Minuteman Security Technologies?
Mayor, I move that the council authorize a 2-year agreement with Minuteman Security Technologies for a total cost of $226,684.53 to purchase an automated license plate reader camera system as presented.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the audience on this item?
Are you about to pass the spending of this money? If it passes?
One more time, David, what was the question?
Are you about to pass if you vote on spending this money?
Are we about to pass?
Are you voting on spending this money?
That's what the motion is, yes.
Okay. Help me with how you're doing this in light of the exchange that I observed at the meeting previously with the police presentation. I basically was stunned because it felt like we were throwing spaghetti against a wall to see what might stick as a justification for spending the money. From the very time this was brought to the council's attention, the idea was raised. I believe it was Commissioner Gilmartin said, "Do you have any data?" Commissioner Gilmartin said again, and I think you did also last time, "Do you have any data?" Do you have any data?
We do. There's quite a bit of reported data, yes. As you may recall from the subsequent meetings to that first one, there has been quite a bit of information provided on exactly who uses these, how they're used, and what we should expect for performance.
Well, why was the last discussion on the first reading, the question come up again then? I didn't see any indication since then of where the data is. Am I missing where you posted it?
David, I'm not sure what data you're looking for specifically. There was a lot provided. Before you continue, let me just make clear to everybody, I was going to summarize both this and the next item. These are a couple of items that are related to policing in Downers Grove, how we accomplish our policing. They reflect a couple of things. They reflect changes in state law. They also reflect the change in environment that we find ourselves in. I'm sure many of you read and see the news. We have been working with other agencies throughout DuPage County, as well as our own police department, to develop a system and a process intended to improve the effectiveness of policing and the safety of policing in the village of Downers Grove. The first conversation about this occurred, I'm going to probably get this wrong, but I think it was during long-range planning early in the summer. We have had 2 or 3 subsequent conversations about it, and tonight, after those conversations, we are intending to move to vote on this. The motion that was made tonight is the first part of that. It has to do with a series of cameras throughout the village, which we believe will enhance our ability to police the village of Downers Grove. There's a lot of data behind this. It has to do with how it's used, where else it's been used, experiences that have been incurred elsewhere. Downers Grove is nowhere near the first. And so I'm just for full context, that's kind of where we stand now. If there's specific data that you're after, David, at this point, it probably would be best to submit that in writing to Dave, and I'm sure he'll try his best to get it to you.
Where is the data that you're referring to?
There are packets of reports that we've been dealing with as a council for the better part of 4 months now. It's embedded. I don't know which data you're looking for, but there's pieces of it embedded in all of that.
Do you have any information, to be specific, on the success that this system provides in terms of retrieving stolen vehicles?
We are regular participants in that. As I mentioned earlier, this is a system that is used by multiple agencies throughout the county. As we talked about last week, this is largely an extension of an existing program to give us more fixed cameras at more locations. The village of Downers Grove has been using license plate readers on several police cars for 5 or 6 years at least, and we found those to be very helpful to us and very successful. Beyond that, the village is, as a part of DuPage County, often the receiver of the information that these cameras generate. I'm not going to try and repeat Chief Gillette's presentations, 2 different occasions of this process, but we believe them to be likely to be very effective for the village of Downers Grove.
Mayor? May I?
Sure, please.
Just real quick, if you look at page 1 of the staff report on this, it's available on the website on the agenda if you haven't checked it out yet. But inside a little box is an update and recommendation. And the first bullet point reads, based upon the data from the police department's current mobile plate reader system, there were approximately 200 hits over a 30-day period. So that's, as the mayor said, that's currently using just a couple of cameras on a couple of police cars. This would be a much more extensive system that there's 86 pages worth of reading here for you to check out.
Well, there was also the implication that the system is going to help prevent crime by detecting stolen vehicles that are feared to be coming to the village to commit additional crimes. Is there any data on that?
You know, David, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer your question because I don't have the report memorized. Greg was able to find that on page 1. I would suggest going back to that report. If there's some question that we can answer, it's probably going to take some time to get it back to you. I know that what this has been is a process of a series of meetings. I think we're probably into 3 or 4, which means we're probably over an hour or so worth of discussion, where we have each asked questions along the way that have made each of us feel as though this was a valuable asset to our policing and likely to be successful. There are all kinds of things that have to do with how we interact with other agencies, what the likelihood of interaction and type of interaction with offenders is as a result of using the system, how many times it identifies vehicles in other communities and what their success rates are. There's a lot here. I can't recite it all for you because for me, probably for my colleagues, it has been a process of learning to this point. But there is as Greg said, there's 80-some pages worth of this information available to anyone who wants to read it.
Well, I heard at the last meeting, you asked a question, Commissioner Gilmartin asked a question, can you provide us data? I didn't see anything in any of the material subsequent to that that constituted data of any specific nature, either in terms of which communities are using this, how successfully these communities believe they're using it, what in their case they're using it for, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was you yourself who asked, gee, wouldn't it be interesting to know what other communities adjacent to the freeways are using this information? So I'm surprised in that vein that you're prepared to vote tonight to commit this money when, other than you being persuaded that this is going to do something, I don't see any data that's actually providing anything other than sort of a general feeling that, well, we think this is going to be a good idea, and since we're using asset forfeiture money, we're not hitting anybody for the cost.
Did you have is there another question you're looking for?
The basic question is, you're telling me there's data out there, I don't know where you're saying the data is.
Okay.
If you don't have any data, and as you know from remarks I've already submitted, I don't think you guys use data often to make decisions anyway, so maybe my standing here is pointless in that regard because you don't really need data to make decisions anyway.
Okay.
So,
thank you. Any other questions from the audience on this item? Council comments or questions? Rosa, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Cullivaney?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye. That motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion concerning an agreement with Axon Enterprise?
Mayor, I move that the council authorize a 5-year agreement with Axon Enterprise, Inc. in the amount of $698,841.20 for the purchase and servicing of body-worn cameras, squad car cameras, and a cloud-based digital video system for the police department interview rooms and evidence management as presented.
Second.
Any questions from the audience on this item? Questions or comments from the council? As alluded to earlier, this has to do with 2 things. One is we in Downers Grove feel like there's an opportunity to be better from a policing standpoint, better from an accountability standpoint. This also is in response to recently changed state law and brings us into compliance well ahead of the deadlines set by the state. Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Cullivaney?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye. That motion passes unanimously. As the end of our active agenda tonight,
Mayor, we got one more.
One more.
Oh, ha, that's what happens when you scribble too quick. Thank you, Greg. There is one more active agenda item. Is there a motion concerning an ordinance regulating small wireless facilities?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt an amendment to the ordinance providing for the regulation of and application for small wireless facilities as presented.
Second.
Any audience questions or comments on this item? Council comments or questions? It starts to sound like a little bit of a broken record, but many times what we do when we pass ordinances is bring our community into compliance with state law. This is another amendment and adjustment to do just that. Rosa, please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Cullivaney?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion passes unanimously as well. Now, we are done with our active agenda. Item 9 on the agenda is our first reading. This is the portion of the meeting where we begin a discussion or continue a discussion on subjects on which we do not plan to take any official action tonight. With that, Manager Fieldman.
Thank you, Mayor Barnett. There are 2 items on tonight's first reading agenda. Item A is an ordinance which would close out and retire the downtown tax increment financing district. The tax increment financing district has sparked massive investment in our downtown and has been a transformative agent. Our downtown has been revitalized, and we look forward to continuing with that investment in the next several years under our new operating model. This ordinance is the last Village Council action on the downtown tax increment financing district, a project which started a quarter century ago. Staff is happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Thank you, Dave. Reverse things a little bit here. Is there anyone from the council that has a comment or a question on this item? Craig, please.
Thank you, Mayor. No questions, just a comment. I'm really disappointed that I'm going to miss next week's meeting because it would terminating this TIF in the status that it is in is a huge win for the Village of Downers Grove. As Manager Fieldman noted, we've had tremendous redevelopment and reinvestment in our downtown. And it was just a few years ago that we were looking very bleakly at the possibility of terminating the TIF after having put a whole lot of other property tax dollars in it to retire the bonds that were originally floated 20 plus years ago. And we don't have to do that. And it's because of the success of the redevelopment, because of a lot of hard work by the staff, by councils, by the EDC, and many, many others that I'm forgetting. So many thanks to everybody over the last 20 plus years. And I look forward to even more successes in our downtown. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any audience questions or comments on this item? All right, I'll just add that to Greg's list of thanks. It was December of 1997. None of the folks sitting up here were part of this. But the council at that time, when we think back, deserves a lot of praise because they not only got us going on this, but kept us on the path when it got started to make it successful. And that early path on a TIF is often a big part of how successful they are. Now, TIF, the word TIF, the word rebate agreement, those things are often, can inspire a lot of emotions, many times negative, because they get used and misused in various places. This doesn't involve this body, this council up here, but I can sit up here and tell you with great confidence that councils past, including in particular the one in place in 1997, really did our community a service. Along the way, there have been various agreements with the entities Greg suggested. There have also been other engagements with the other taxing bodies. This is not like the horror stories you sometimes read, and the downtown that you see and that we see and that we all enjoy today is largely a function of the efforts put forth in this TIF and the work since. So if you see any of those folks from 1997, give them a high five along the way. We're all enjoying the fruits of their work. Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. The next item is an ordinance amending certain traffic control provisions along Prairie Avenue. Here to provide background information on this item is our Public Works Director, Andy Sikich.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight I'll be presenting the proposed Prairie Avenue corridor improvements. Before I start, I want to just note that a portion of this presentation is going to include a preview of some items that are also included in Neighborhood Traffic Study Area 7. This study area is from Ogden to Warren and Belmont to Lee, but it will be presented to you in its entirety at a future meeting. Part of Prairie Avenue that we will be discussing tonight is from Belmont to Maine, as you can see on the slide here. Staff has assessed the existing conditions for this stretch of Prairie Avenue. It currently carries between 5,400 and 6,600 vehicles per day. The 85th percentile speeds range anywhere from 32 to 45 miles per hour. We typically use those 85th percentile speeds as they represent the speed that most motorists are not willing to exceed. Between 2015 and 2020, there were 52 accidents along this stretch of Prairie, not including the intersections at Belmont or Main. There are currently no permanent traffic controls on Prairie between Belmont and Main, and there is only one marked pedestrian crossing, which is at Oakwood. Many pedestrians do cross Prairie to go to schools, parks, downtown, and the businesses along Ogden. Here you can see a summary of the proposed improvements. Please note that this does not include the intersection of Forest and Prairie. As you know, that's a separate discussion with temporary improvements already installed and under evaluation that we will actually be discussing a little later tonight. The proposed improvements are as follows. Reduce the speed limit from 30 to 25 miles per hour. Install all-way stop signs at Lee, Oakwood, and Saratoga. Install marked pedestrian crossings at Stonewall and Sealy. Construct pedestrian refuge islands at all 5 of these locations, which will act as traffic calming and provide a safer crossing for pedestrians. Eliminate the existing parking along the south side of Prairie between Belmont and Montgomery, and paint marked bike lanes from Belmont to Lee, and then Sharrow symbols, which I'll show you in a little bit, on the pavement from Lee to Main. I'll describe these all in a little more detail as we go through this presentation. It should be noted that the Transportation and Parking Commission already reviewed these and recommended improvements as recommended by staff. So here you can see a map of the proposed intersection improvements. Again, we are proposing all-way stops at Lee, Oakwood, and Saratoga. Those are the obvious stop signs on the map. And marked pedestrian crossings at Stonewall and Sealy, where you see the little pedestrian sign there. And then again, those temporary improvements at Forest and Prairie are under evaluation, and we'll talk about those later. All-way stops are being recommended at these 3 locations for the following reasons. Lee Avenue acts as a minor collector that carries traffic from Ogden to Warren. Oakwood Avenue currently has a marked school crossing. And Saratoga Avenue, where the north leg carries 2,000 vehicles per day and acts as a local collector from Prairie up to the traffic signal at Saratoga and Ogden. And pedestrian crossings were recommended at these locations for the following reasons. Stonewall Avenue has good sight distance and connects to Hooper's Hollow Park. Sealy Avenue is the only street between Lee and Oakwood that connects Ogden and Warren, and it also connects to Pierce Downer School. This is an image of a pedestrian refuge island. Ours won't necessarily have to look like this, but it gives you the idea, that they provide traffic calming, and they also provide a place for pedestrians to stop halfway across the street if they need to. With regard to proposed bicycle facilities, in this portion of Prairie here from Belmont to Lee, we are proposing 2 11-foot vehicle lanes and 2 marked bike lanes, 1 in each direction. This would require the elimination of the existing parking along the south side of Prairie. This is an image here of what bike lanes might look like, marked bike lanes. Then from Lee to Belmont, the pavement narrows and doesn't have enough room for marked bike lanes. So in this area, we are proposing that Sharrow symbols be painted in each travel lane. Sharrows are used to designate that motorists must share the road with bicycles. They help slow traffic down and raise driver awareness. And that there is a depiction of what they look like without the palm trees, of course. Staff did receive a number of phone calls and emails from residents generally in favor of traffic calming along this stretch of Prairie. A few of the residents who live on Prairie between Belmont and Montgomery have reached out to staff and indicated that they are not in favor of removing the parking. We also received a letter and petition in favor of pedestrian crossing at Oakwood and Prairie. And with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Andy. Any comments or questions from the council on this item? Leslie, please.
Yeah, I do have a question. So the only pedestrian crossings are going to be the ones that are marked. They will not be where we have a 4-way stop, that's correct?
No, there will be pedestrian crossings at the stops as well.
Okay, perfect.
Those are just not, they're not protected by stop signs. They're just unprotected pedestrian
Got it.
crossings.
If we pass this next week, how quickly can Public Works implement this, and can it also be done in stages?
We can do it in stages, but we certainly could, if it's passed, we could put the stop signs in pretty quickly. The other improvements, the pedestrian refuge islands and things would likely happen next year with a resurfacing of Prairie. We'd want to bundle that all together.
And how quickly is quickly on stop signs?
Within a week.
Any other council questions, comments? Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. Thank you, Andy, and thank you to all staff and the TAP Commission. I think these are all great ideas. I mean, the stretch of Prairie from Main Street to Belmont being uncontrolled at this point, other than the new three-way stop that's been there for a few weeks, it is basically resulted in it being a super speedway. And we do obviously have a lot of pedestrians that cross Prairie going in both directions, and this will only make it safer for the entire neighborhood. I look forward to voting for it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. Chris?
Yeah, I just also want to add to that. I appreciate the addition of the bike lanes, both dedicated and shared. I think that's important for our community to become more bike-friendly in a more dedicated way, as well as all of these pedestrian safety measures that I think are going to go a long, long way for many of our residents. So thank you for this thoughtful proposal.
Thank you. Nicole?
Just want to echo my colleagues and say thank you. I think this is long overdue, and I think this will help to make people in these areas feel a lot safer and make their children feel safer when they need to cross Prairie to go to a variety of different places. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the audience on this item?
Hi, Andy Broomhead, 2010 Prairie Avenue. Andy, thank you for all your work on this. We attended the meeting last week as a group of neighbors from the western end of Prairie Avenue, mostly between Cornell and Belmont. We were there mainly because of the release of the neighborhood study number 7. We were kind of taken by surprise that this was already being voted on at that point. We were not aware that there was a specific Prairie Avenue corridor project. I think some of the residents, and there may be some folks after me, that will have similar things to say, but we just don't want to lose our parking. In the report, it says the parking is underutilized. I guess I would ask, just compared to what? If you compare it to Main Street, yes. If you compare it to any other residential street in the neighborhood, I would say no. We park there every day. When people come to visit us, they park there every day, just like any one of the north-south streets in the neighborhood. It also says in the report that the farthest distance somebody would have to walk would be 300 feet to one of the side streets. Well, where I am, 2010 Prairie, that's not true. Total walking distance to the first parking space, if someone was lucky enough to get it, would be on Woodward, and that would be almost a 430-foot walk. And that's only if you get the first one. Whereas if we lose all our parking, I would imagine holidays, Super Bowl, 4th of July, we're not the only ones that are going to be fighting for those spots. We could be talking about quite a bit more than that. So as newer residents, we just moved there in February. That was a consideration we took in when looking at the home is, yes, we're on a busier street, we're aware of that, but at least we have parking. So the plan included an alternate number 2, I don't know if I'm correct in that, alternate 2, which just extended the same process, including Sharrow's shared bike lanes just all the way through and retain that parking. So I think I can only speak for myself, but I know we have some other residents here that would ask that I don't know the process. Do we kick that back to committee? Can we just ask that that plan be reviewed, being that we have a lot of residents that are on long blocks on that side, that parking all the way on the side streets is not really feasible. The other thing was a stop sign, but I don't know if that's better asked if the next transportation committee stop signs can be moved. We had issue with Lee being the last stop sign. We tend to call the area between Stonewall and Belmont the Hammer Zone. You come down a hill at Stonewall, you have a wide view of the road, and all you see is that long light at Belmont, and people just gun it. And if they're coming in from Ogden, coming down Lee, or coming down they still know the last stop sign is all the way at Lee, and that leaves quite a bit of open road for them to hit. I would think that a stop sign at Woodward would slow traffic down in the middle of that zone. I understand that Pershing is not feasible because it's so close to Belmont. So we unfortunately weren't present. Like I said, we weren't aware for whatever reason that was being voted on. I think we could have addressed these concerns there. I'm sorry that we're addressing them here, but we just weren't aware. So.
No worries. Glad you're here.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. Joe Rondinelli, 1920 Prairie. I came all the way back from the Sox game to be here today. So hopefully people appreciate that. So I live in the middle of Woodward and Stonewall. I built the house on Stonewall and Prairie as well. Getting rid of the parking lanes on Prairie is a big mistake. It's a huge consideration for people that actually live on Prairie. I don't have a roundabout driveway, and a number of people on Prairie don't have a roundabout driveway to be able to back in and back out. So more often than not, people are parking on Prairie. My kids get picked up at Stonewall and Prairie. We never cross the streets. St. Mary's, St. Joe's, the public schools, they all get picked up on the corners on Prairie. If you want to put bike lanes in, I'm all for that. Put them on Warren. People are speeding on Warren all the time. I agree with this gentleman. Alternative number 2 makes a ton of sense. Like, have one bike lane in there, but everyone utilizes the parking lanes. It's not like we live in an evergreen state, right? People are biking 3-6 months of the year. People are parking year-round on Prairie. All of our neighbors, everyone utilizes it. I'm sandwiched in the middle, and we have other neighbors that are also sandwiched in the middle that view this as a big consideration. Like, people aren't going to want to buy those houses on Prairie if there's no parking. Like, people aren't going to want to walk around the corner. When you have babysitters come, they don't want to walk around the corner on Woodward or Stonewall to stop by and get to your house. So I'd ask you guys to revisit this. I have 3 kids under 8. I'm all for people slowing down on Prairie. So I'm not against people going slower, but we have people park on that street all the time. So I'd ask that you guys relook at what the options are. And I'm a little pissed because I've lived in Downers Grove 30 years, and I've lived on Prairie for 6. No one told me once that this was a potential ordinance or, up for consideration. Like, the village should have said something and gotten feedback from people that actually live on Prairie if parking is important to them. So I'd ask you guys to reconsider this before you try to pass this ordinance.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Hi, I'm Lauren Loeb. I live at 2029 Prairie Avenue, so we're just in from Prairie and Woodward. We moved into our house 9 years ago, and we were really excited to come out from the city due to the quiet nature of the suburbs. We quickly realized Prairie is a highway, much like Sheffield that we lived on in the city. At the time we moved in, our kids were not born and 1 year old. We have parking directly in front of our house. That parking from the time we have moved into this house, we have called our grab zone, rightly or wrongly. It adds an extra sense of security for me. Now, granted, my kids are 8 and 10 now, so they know the benefits of crossing the street safely and things like that. We often use that parking as well. My parents are getting older, and to see them have to go over to Woodward, that's a pretty big hike. Our neighbors have like a 150-foot lot next to us. And then to go down Pershing is even farther. So I, like Joe, was not aware that this was happening, kind of got looped in at the end. And I really wish that I would have known ahead of time, or that residents on Prairie could have been considered in some of this planning. Ideally, for me, I would love to retain that parking. Andy, Joe, Bill Nally even, and Molly Bailey, who couldn't be here tonight, we use the parking daily. Between the 4 of us neighbors alone, I can guarantee you there are 2 parked cars out in front of our 3 houses at any given time. What I would love to see, in addition to Andy, is that stop sign at Woodward. People fly to make that light at Belmont. We have 2 kids that go to Henry Puffer. Andy has 3. And we often see it. I agree. Putting it at Pershing is detrimental to cars because people whip off the red on, the right turn on red there. I think you would see a lot of accidents there, but I think if you put a stop sign, it would also slow down traffic coming from Stonewall to hit Warren to get to the train. That's another big concern. People whip down that hill going way more than 25 miles an hour to get down to Warren or to get to Prairie. So I would just ask if we could include the thoughts of people who actually live on Prairie and live in the surrounding neighborhoods. We really do value that parking. I am all for bike lanes as well. Put them in, put in the shallows, put in pedestrian crossings up where you've mentioned. I love all of this. I'm really excited to see it happen on Prairie. People go way too fast. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to all of the residents. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bill Nally. I live at 4808 Woodward Avenue. I would like to express my gratitude to the village for considering traffic and its impact on the residents of this area. Without getting too wordy, I do want to reiterate what has been said about this area. I am absolutely in favor of adding a stop sign at the corner of Woodward and Prairie. Of course, this is only anecdotal, and it's several years back because people are not taking the train with the same level of frequency as they were before the pandemic. But because there is only a yield at the intersection of Woodward and Warren, you already have people who are just barreling down that street. And I am concerned that the desire to improve pedestrian traffic on Prairie will increase. I don't know that there's been any study on what's going to happen to the subsidiaries, particularly out the western side where there are you have 2 stop signs and a traffic stop at the eastern end, but on the western end, it's much further out. And I understand that you don't want to back up traffic, but I don't know how much has been studied in terms of where that's going to redirect people. I will also note that on my side of Woodward, we don't have sidewalks. So if we do have people who are forced off of off of Prairie, to park on our street, we're going to have to cross, through that. It's going to increase the level of hassle that we're going to have right there at the top of that street. So it's going to be an inconvenience. I would encourage that to be evaluated as you decide whether or not to vote on it or to amend the ordinance. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this subject? Okay. David, coming down.
Can someone explain the purpose for putting stop signs at the so-called collector streets? I guess I'm unclear as to whether there's a problem now on streets like Saratoga, which already has a stop sign, and if Prairie does not have a stop sign, but you're going to put a stop sign on Prairie, is that intended somehow to do what, other than the obvious, which is slow traffic?
So on page 2 of the report for tonight, it lists the various goals of these changes that include speed limit reductions and stop controls, traffic calming. At the stop control section, it lists each street and talks a little bit about what makes that situation unique. These neighborhoods and traffic systems are systems. They function with each other. Sidewalks play a role, where there's hills, where there's not, where there's signage, where there's not. This is our professional team putting together a list of actions they think will help reduce speed, control traffic, calm traffic, provide bike facilities. That's what this is. So why one versus the other one, I'd have to defer to our team who picked that, but it's an effort at trying to analyze the whole system and pick some changes and adjustments that will improve each of those aspects of how the system functions.
Well, specifically, for example, on Saratoga, 2,000 cars on Saratoga. I don't know how many of those are heading southbound from the north leg of Saratoga. If people are stopped on Saratoga, is the concept somehow that by putting a stop sign on Prairie in each direction, you're doing what? Other than slowing traffic on Prairie. What's the impact of that on Saratoga?
Andy, would you like to weigh in on that?
Especially at a intersection like this, where you've got one leg that carries not Prairie traffic, but significant amount of traffic. For pedestrian safety and for vehicular safety, this just makes logical sense to put this four-way stop here. One of the impetus behind this is to make Prairie a safer place for all people, all modes of traffic, walkers, bikers, vehicles. And so when you put in a stop sign, it's not necessarily just for the vehicular traffic that's there. It's for pedestrians, it's for bicyclists, and this, because of the volume of traffic on North Saratoga, this just makes logical sense to put it here.
Thank you. Other questions? Come on back.
With the number of stop signs that you're putting up on Prairie, do you imagine that people are going to be able to travel more than 25 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour as the posted limit is now?
I hope not.
David, do I imagine that somebody could drive 25 miles an hour between stop signs? How do you want me to answer that? One of the other elements here is that we're intending to reduce the speed, or proposing at least to reduce the speed limit, and so clearly trying to improve, as Andy said, the safety of all modes of traffic, pedestrians, non-motorized and motorized vehicles. The additional stop signs and the reduced speed limit, we hope, will add to that for all modes. Other questions?
My question is really, again, about the parking. Like, does parking, like eliminating parking, really reduce the speed of traffic? Wouldn't reducing the speed limit reduce the speed of traffic more so than eliminating parking? Because if you have cars parked, people driving on Prairie see, hey, there's a car parked, I should slow down, as opposed to, hey, there's a bike lane. There's no bikes driving right now, or biking. I can keep going the speed I want. I just want to try to understand how the parking is tied to reduce speed limits, because I'm all for reducing the speed limit and adding stop signs, but parking, I feel, is a separate topic. And maybe that's a question for him because he's the expert, but I just want to understand how those are intertwined.
Every once in a while, the non-experts get over their skis, so we'll take a run at that as well, and then we'll let Andy fix it.
Okay.
But these are systems that we were talking about before, and there are multiple goals, and those goals include improving traffic safety for vehicular traffic, improving non-motorized safety for non-motorized traffic, and pedestrian safety. And so what you've seen here, there's an alternate design as well. So you have a couple of things that we're being presented with. What we're doing tonight is trying to discuss those. All of us learn more about those, audience and council alike. I suspect we'll hear more about that, but it's most likely related to trying to take opportunity to improve bicycle safety as well.
Okay. Well, my question is, like, if the goal is to reduce speeding, like, how does adding, like, eliminating parking reduce that?
Time out. So now with that, we're going to let the professionals weigh in, like we said.
Right. So the idea here is to provide improved safety for all modes of transportation. The bike lanes are intended to provide an increased level of safety for cyclists. Both bicycle lanes and on-street parking are recognized ways of traffic calming and to reduce speed. So really, you have a choice here as a council to value, do you value the parking on the street? How do you value that compared to the goal of the separated bike lane? They both have value to the community, they both have value to the neighborhood. If the council would like to keep the parking as an option for this stretch of Prairie, you could go with the sharrows striping, and that would allow elements of both. If you would like to favor the bicycle safety design over the convenience and attributes of parking, then you would go with the plan that was proposed here tonight.
Thank you. All of these things remind everybody, for those that have been watching these meetings for 6 weeks now, about, all of these traffic things have trade-offs. There just aren't any good, clean answers. When you're mixing traffic and driver behaviors and pedestrians and bikes and trying to create an environment that respects all of those and improves safety, the answers aren't so obvious. There are always trade-offs. And this, as described by Dave, is one of those questions that we're going to be asked to answer, and we're appreciative of everybody's input on it.
What, another question is, what is the cost trade-off of alternative 2 versus the alternative with eliminating the parking? Is it more cost-effective for the village to keep the parking?
We're talking about paint. I doubt there's much difference.
It's a negligible difference.
Yeah.
We're talking about on-street striping for both options.
So then the question is really, if they both mute the speed of traffic on Prairie, like, how many people cycle versus how many people park? I mean, you know how many times I see an Amazon truck sit in the parking lane outside my house, walking around, and same with the post office? I mean, it's crazy. And I walk to the Belmont train station every day to go to the city. I see no cyclists. I see cars parked there all the time. So I just really ask you guys to like really consider the alternative of not eliminating the parking, because as you've heard from other neighbors, a lot of people utilize it, grandparents, babysitters, ourselves, to get in and out because we don't have turnaround driveways. It's a safety issue for us too, so we park on the street. I'd really ask you guys to think about it before you pass, this legislation. So thank you.
We appreciate it. That's exactly what we're doing here, guys, is thinking about it.
I'm actually not here for this issue, but it raised an interesting issue that I decided to pitch in. Not from a person who has to park there, as these people have to do, and not as a driver, but as a bicyclist. I was an avid bicyclist before a couple of hip injuries, but I can tell you that unless you put the bike lane that you're talking about, which is a dedicated bike lane, all the way down Prairie, you're going to it's probably not worth it. And you're going to probably create a safety situation for the bike riders. Because if you've got a dedicated bike lane and you think you're in a dedicated bike lane, you tend to think that that dedicated bike lane continues. And what you're talking about is a dedicated bike lane that ends on a busy street. So you'd be better off to remain consistent. And because Prairie Avenue doesn't have the space to have a dedicated bike lane all the way down, your bike lane should be consistent on that whole stretch of Prairie. Quite frankly, there shouldn't be any bikers on Prairie. It's too busy. You've got a ton of room over on Warren. If you wanted to put a dedicated bike lane, that's really where it ought to be. But if you want a bike lane on Prairie, make it consistent. Don't change the type of bike lanes that you have on Prairie, because you're going to create confusion with the bike riders. They're going to think that they've got a dedicated lane and that it doesn't change for them as they're riding down Prairie, but it is. You're switching it from a dedicated line to a share the lane. So from a bike rider's perspective, you'd rather be consistent. And to be consistent, you have to be the, whatever you call them, share lanes, not a dedicated bike lane that ends in the middle of a block or at an intersection. Just my thought as a bike rider.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience?
On the subject of biking and related effects, traffic effects that this might induce, I have, I guess, a couple of questions regarding Warren. There was reference made to the idea that Warren is part of being studied. I guess under the circumstances, I'm curious to understand how soon decisions are going to be made with respect to Warren. Because right now there's an extensive stretch of Warren that is completely unmarked with either a center divider or bike lanes of any kind. And if these traffic changes are introduced, from what I'm hearing other people say, it's quite likely that there will be impacts on traffic that exists on Warren. Related to that, toward the Belmont end of Warren, and I don't live in that area, so I don't know exactly which streets are involved, but there are currently yields, not stop signs. And it's never been obvious to me why there was a change from having stop signs on the streets that intersect Warren versus the streets that have yields. And so more specifically related to my general comment is to wonder if, as part of any changes that occur on Prairie, it might be appropriate to consider changing those yield signs immediately in conjunction to stop signs as a way potentially of slowing down traffic or improving the way in which traffic on those streets approach Warren, which would, from my experience, also improve safety for people who are bicycling on Warren, like I do. And then I guess the other related specific question is if you don't act now with respect to Warren, is there a way to indicate when you will be dealing with what's going on in Warren?
We won't be acting on Warren tonight because Warren's not on the agenda, and these are first reading items. I suspect, based on the information that we were given in preparation for Prairie Avenue discussion, we're not prepared to discuss Warren.
But it will be coming up shortly because neighborhood traffic number 7 addresses all the issues that Mr. Rose just identified, and we'll have it on an agenda shortly.
Thanks, Dave.
My name is Javier, and we are at 2030 Prairie Avenue. In regards to the loss of the potential loss of the parking spaces on Prairie Street, that would be a loss for us because we do utilize that occasionally. We do have visitors, relatives that come over. But at home, I also have a college-age stepson who is, going to school and then working different hours as well. So since we don't have a driveway that is a turnaround and we don't have parking immediately in front of our street, an available option for that person is to park across the street so he doesn't block us out of our driveway. I think when all this started, I might be wrong in this, but I think a lot of it had to do with speeding, and a lot of us were rightfully concerned about that. I think what has been proposed, especially the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit along there, would go a long way to slow down speeding in that area, and without having to lose those parking spots. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this subject?
Good evening, Robert Schroeder, 4700 Prince Street. My questions were concerning the study being done on Prairie and Forest with barrier. And I was wondering, seeing that only 20% of the traffic has been diverted to Maine, the rest to Prince and Saratoga, if a study could be done without these barriers after these stop signs have been put into place.
That is still coming up on the agenda tonight.
Oh, my way ahead of schedule.
You got a little bit ahead. That's okay.
I thought I was being left behind.
No, don't worry about it. Anyone else on the Prairie Avenue traffic study, kind of western Prairie Avenue mostly?
Sorry for the second comment. It's Lauren at 2029 Prairie again. One thing that I would urge council and the traffic study to also look at and this gets a little dicey, I think, because it's not just Downers Grove, it's Dupage County, is the safety of the school crossing at Prairie and Belmont. It is really hectic for our kids to walk to school, and even though I have a 5th and a 3rd grader, I often do not feel comfortable with their ages crossing that street alone. I think, it took COVID happening for me to allow my 4th grade son to cross Prairie by himself. So I often still walk them to school, and I don't feel that the one police officer standing in the middle of that intersection is often enough, especially with people getting very aggressive with right turn on reds. I know we did have a group of community parents that got a flashing sign to turn, no turn on right when the walk is illuminated and things like that. But it is a big problem for the puffer parents that live on the north side of the tracks that have walkers that go to school. And from what I've seen over the past 9 years of living on this street, we used to be the youngest people on that street by tenfold. We are now the seasoned veterans, and there are a whole new crew. Almost every house is turned on that street of Prairie. If they haven't been flipped to new builds, they have young families coming in and renovating. It's been wonderful. And it's, I think, reinforcing the need for the speed to slow down on Prairie, but it also highlights a need at Belmont and Prairie for the kids that attend Henry Puffer to have some more safety measures put in place there. So thank you for taking the time to listen today. I do appreciate all the concern and consideration going towards the safety of our residents.
Okay, we'll come back to the council here. There may have been some questions raised that we want to get into. I also want to just remind everyone here on the introductory portion of this report that we're considering here tonight, the portion of it that we are, there are currently no traffic controls in this 1.36 mile stretch of Prairie. Residents of the neighborhood requested traffic calming along Prairie and improved safety for pedestrians and cyclists. So that's what's got us started down this path, and doing so, we've studied some things, we've learned some things, and what we're seeing now is our discussion of what might be done to address those requests for safety for pedestrians and cyclists. Anybody on the council? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Is the parking that's currently on Prairie overnight allowed, or is it the same restriction that we have in the village?
Same overnight restrictions for the balance of the village, not allowed to park overnight.
Okay. And then I would just add the comment on maybe the lack of cycling is due to perhaps the lack of safe cycling that village provides. If we're talking about not seeing as many people biking, I think this is a perfect opportunity to start kind of lighting that candle around offering that safe travel, because I think certainly no one feels as safe driving or biking down Prairie in its current state. Thank you.
Rich, please.
2 questions. Is there enough room to both allow parking on the south side and a Cheryl? Cheryl, yes.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Could you maybe address that? Rich, were you asking about a striped parking lane and then a Shero and then the drive aisles?
Well, I guess I'm asking, to reframe my question, how would we is there a way to accomplish that, to have both parking and a Shero in the south lane and retain the bike lane on the north side of the street?
We could not retain the bike lane on the north side of the street. We would have to have Sheros on both sides of the street. Yes.
We just don't have the room for that.
Correct.
Do you have I'm going to ask you a subjective question. Do you have a feeling for the difference in safety with a dedicated bike lane versus a Shero?
I don't have a study to back it up, no. But, it's a hierarchy. The dedicated bike lanes are viewed as safer than the Sheros, but, anything for bicyclists is awareness and protection, so.
But I'm guessing we feel satisfied that the Sheros are safe enough from Lee to Main Street just because we don't have the physical room for a bike lane.
The bicyclists are going to be in the road one way or another, so the Sheros just kind of call attention to that and help to raise awareness.
Okay. And then My second part of my question is, what is the notification process prior to a TAP meeting on something of this nature, like the Prairie study?
So we have an established practice on neighborhood traffic studies. We've been doing those for a better part of a decade. On neighborhood traffic studies, we notify each and every household of the meetings. This Prairie plan came about in the middle of neighborhood traffic study number 7 and was born also of discussions we're going to have continued on here tonight. When we put together this staff-initiated plan, when we brought it to TAP on the same night as neighborhood traffic study number 7, we did a couple things for notification. We sent snail mail letters to every property that fronted on Prairie, informing them of the TAP meeting, and then we also posted information in general on our website.
Thank you.
Other council questions, comments? Greg, please.
Thank you, Mayor. What considerations led you to not having another stop sign between Lee and Belmont?
From a traffic perspective, Lee is the local collector that goes from Ogden down to Warren. West of there, I'm not sure we have a logical collector road where a stop sign would make sense, but we certainly could look at that.
I don't think we have any strong objections to further considerations of stop signs in this area. As brought up by some of the residents and neighbors, Pershing might present some challenges, but the other streets, I think, we're open to consideration.
I just wanted to understand if there was a particular reason against it. That's all.
No reason against. That's why I was saying we're open to further consideration.
Given the commentary, I think I'd like to know where you would put one between Lee and Belmont, if we were to add one more.
We can get you that information shortly for our next discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Other council questions? Rich?
Just an editorial comment. On the east side, there was some concern raised to me that the stop signs are too close together, so on Sunday morning I took a drive through Hinsdale after taking a drive down Prairie to see the distances, and I did notice a few things, that the speed limit in Clarendon Hills on Chicago Avenue is 25 miles per hour. When you cross over Route 83 to Hinsdale, it remains at 25 miles an hour. Their first stop sign is at Monroe. 2 blocks later is the next stop sign at Madison. 2 blocks after that is a stop sign at Vine, where the speed limit drops to 20 miles per hour. And then 2 blocks after that is another stop sign at Lincoln. Then you go to stop sign 1 block later at Washington and 1 block later at Garfield. Now, Chicago Avenue is not exactly the same as Prairie, but you wouldn't expect that with 2 completely different suburbs. However, I think it has a lot of similarities. So if people are looking for a precedent, I think that's a good precedent, and I'm fairly certain the reason they did that was to slow down traffic through those residential neighborhoods.
Okay. Anyone else? Greg? Oh, I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to briefly build off of what Commissioner Jose said. I'd be interested in seeing another stop as well, particularly on Woodward, as that is what some of the residents requested. I'd like to see information on that specifically, though for that whole stretch would be great. Thank you.
All right, I had a couple of questions. Andy, you don't need to answer these tonight, but if you could add these to the information that we get. One is, as we talk about, consider the concept or possibility of losing parking and suggesting that parking is on adjacent streets. It'd be good for me to understand if there are any other situations where there aren't sidewalks. That sounds like a conflict to me, and so I'd just like to understand that. Where we might be suggesting people park if we take parking away, what are the sidewalk conditions in those areas? And then the other thing is, was any part of, this is not a fair question, but when we talk about things like Pershing, Was any part of this, in our minds, intended to compel drivers to choose a different route? So we talked about slowing them down, we talked about improving safety. Clearly, those are the enumerated elements of what we were trying to get at. But I'm just wondering if we think that it would have some of that effect as well. I can't help but question, as we consider a lot of our traffic in town, how much traffic is intending to go to and from within the neighborhood and how much of it is trying to skip a stoplight at Ogden Avenue. So I don't know if that's anything that we can quantify or even comment on, but it's something that's in the back of my head, and if you guys did have an opinion at some point, I'd love to hear it. Anyone else? Dave?
Don't want to jump the gun here, Mayor, but if you're looking for next steps, we have a little bit of work to do, and I think we'll put this back on another first reading for more dialogue with the council and the neighbors. So it'll either be next week or following into November. So a little bit of time to do some more homework and get some more feedback and go through these ideas.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
And just to be clear, I'd like you to investigate the Sharrow for the entire length.
Will do.
Okay,
That ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
that takes us on to our manager's report. You're not off the hook yet, Dave.
Thank you, Mayor. One item on tonight's manager's report, and it is, this is our first monthly report regarding the impacts of the temporary improvements installed at Prairie and Forest. This report provides the Village Council with information and the opportunity, but not the obligation, to provide further policy direction. The information presented tonight includes traffic counts that were taken on two 24-hour periods. One on Tuesday, October 5th, and the other on Thursday, October 7th. This is the same counting process that the village uses on other traffic-related projects, including neighborhood traffic studies. Staff has rounded these traffic counts and expressed them in terms of ranges, reflecting the two different counts. The same process was used in September, prior to the installation of the temporary improvements, to establish the baseline, or before, conditions. With those introductory comments, I am happy to recall my friend Andy to present the report. Thank you.
Once again, good evening, Mayor and Council. I will now present the updated information regarding the temporary measures that were recently installed at the intersection of Prairie and Forest. I'm going to start with a little background summary information. The intersection at Prairie and Forest is located just west of the traffic signal at Main and Prairie, as seen here. 24 accidents occurred at this intersection between January 2015 and April 2021. The majority of these accidents included vehicles northbound on Forest and eastbound on Prairie. Contributing factors included the traffic volume and speeds on Prairie, the traffic volume on the south leg of Forest, and limited sight distance looking west from northbound Forest. Back in 2020, once these accidents came to our attention, staff began working on a plan to reduce the frequency and severity of accidents at this location. The initial village response included some tree pruning to improve sight distance, driver feedback signs, and increased police presence. A meeting was held on March 30th in 2021, and in May, temporary measures were removed after In May, temporary measures were deployed, not removed, to prevent left turns and through movements from Forest onto Prairie and to provide some traffic calming. These temporary measures were removed after 2 weeks due to observed dangerous driving behaviors. Staff then proposed multiple options for this intersection. They included stop signs, either 3 or 4-way, right in, right out on Forest, using either pork chop islands or a barrier median on Prairie, or permanently closing the south leg or both legs of Forest. These options were reviewed and discussed by the Transportation and Parking Commission and by the Village Council in July, August, and September. And on September 7th, the Village Council directed staff to install temporary traffic control measures, including the closure of the south leg of Forest at Prairie and adding stop signs on Prairie to create an all-way stop. Public Works personnel installed these temporary measures on September 17th after taking initial baseline traffic counts earlier that week. This included barriers closing the south leg of Forest, stop signs on Prairie to create the all-way stop, along with striping of stop bars and crosswalks, and temporary medians in the middle of Prairie to provide the traffic calming. Last week, as Dave mentioned, Public Works staff took additional traffic counts after the temporary measures had been in place for about 3 weeks. I'm going to give you the key takeaways from what we've seen so far, and then I'll dig into some of the details. The first major takeaway is that both speeds and traffic volumes at this intersection have been reduced significantly. No rear-end crashes or backups onto Main have been reported due to the stop signs on Prairie. Traffic has been dispersed into the street network, and I will speak a little bit more specifically in a minute. About 10 to 20% of traffic that used to take northbound Forest appears to now be driving in areas outside of the study area, and the traffic speeds on northbound Prince have increased slightly. I'll start with a little bit of what traffic looked like before these measures were put into place. Prairie Avenue has typically carried between about 5,400 and 6,600 vehicles per day. Forest Avenue between Franklin and Prairie has historically carried anywhere from 1,600 to 2,300 vehicles per day. Prince Street between Franklin and Prairie has historically carried 250 to 300 vehicles per day. And Saratoga Avenue between Franklin and Prairie has historically carried between 600 and 850 vehicles per day. As I mentioned, Public Works staff took updated counts again last week, and the first somewhat obvious result is that Forest Avenue between Franklin and Prairie now sees a lot less traffic. It's now carrying roughly 10% of what it was before the temporary measures were put into place. So of course the big question is, where did that traffic go? It appears that roughly 10 or 20% of the traffic that used to use northbound Forest is now driving in areas outside of the study area. The remaining vehicles appear to be using Franklin and are fairly evenly split between those vehicles that go west on Franklin towards Prince and Saratoga and those that head east toward Main Street. You can see here that between 450 and 750 additional vehicles went west on Franklin. These are per day, by the way, these are per day. And about 600 to 650 additional vehicles went east toward Main. After this change, the total traffic volumes on these two blocks was increased to just over 1,500 vehicles per day on Franklin between Forest and Prince, and just over 3,300 vehicles per day between Forest and Main. It appears that most of the additional traffic that now heads west on Franklin from Forest uses northbound Prince and northbound Saratoga. Northbound traffic on Prince increased by about 150 to 200 vehicles per day, and northbound traffic on Saratoga increased by around 200 to 325 vehicles per day. The total traffic on Prince north of Franklin has more than doubled to between 530 and 590 vehicles per day, and the total traffic on this block of Saratoga is now around 950 to 970 vehicles per day. Traffic on Prairie at this location was reduced by roughly 750 to 900 vehicles per day, which is a reduction of about 12 to 15%. Another thing that we take a look at are the 85th percentile speeds, which again we use as an indicator. In general, speeds were not significantly changed throughout the neighborhood, with a few notable exceptions. First, the speeds on Prairie at all sides of the intersection at Forest are now significantly lower. The most notable reduction has been to the eastbound traffic from Prince to Forest. Before measures were installed, the 85th percentile speed here was around 37 miles per hour. When the updated counts were taken, it had dropped to 26.6 miles per hour, which is a reduction of more than 10 miles per hour. And this is important because the speed of this eastbound traffic at this location is one of the major contributing factors to the accidents at this intersection. The 85 percentile speeds on the surrounding streets pretty much stayed roughly the same or slightly decreased, with the exception of northbound traffic on Prince between Franklin and Prairie, where they increased from just over 28 miles per hour to just shy of 32 miles per hour, for an increase of about 12%. Residents on this block of Prince Street submitted a traffic calming petition form a few days after the temporary control measures were installed. And then I'll just go through these key takeaways one more time. Both speeds and traffic volumes at the intersection of Prairie and Forest have been reduced significantly. No rear-end crashes or backups onto Main have been reported due to the stop signs. Traffic has been dispersed into the street network. About 10 to 20% of traffic that used to take northbound Forest appears to now be driving in areas outside of the study area, and the traffic speeds on northbound Prince have increased. And with that, I would open up to any questions.
Thank you, Andy. Any comments or questions from the council on this update? Leslie, go ahead.
Do you have any thoughts on why Prince is the only one that seems to have increased, since we are splitting about 50-50 between Saratoga and Prince, of the folks that are going that direction?
I'm not sure. Oh, increased speeds?
Yes,
Well,
yes, sorry.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. With regard to the traffic on Prairie, the decrease in both speed and volume, do you attribute that to the stop signs that were put in place in addition to the closing off of the street, or are there other factors at play?
It could be a little bit of both. It could be, there is some southbound traffic increases on Prince and Saratoga, not as much as the northbound, but it could be cars that used to go southbound on Forest are now going southbound on Saratoga and Prince. So there's a small number of cars that wouldn't be going through that intersection anymore because they're now heading south.
I'm sorry, maybe I misspoke. I was thinking of Prairie. I understand that the traffic on Prairie decreased 12 to 15%, and the speeds have dropped, both going east and west. And I'm wondering what led to, what do you think contributed to that?
The decrease in speeds is due to the stop sign. I would, and the traffic calming, but the stop sign, obviously. So I guess I'm not explaining it well. Cars that used to go Prairie and then make a right on Forest now are making a right on Saratoga or a right on Prince. Not to the level that you're seeing the decrease on Prairie. It's more like 100 cars or 200 cars.
I see. Okay.
So that's some of it. The rest of it, I would just speculate.
Thank you.
Any other council questions, comments?
I have a couple questions. Is there a reason why we used 4 sets of data prior to the study and then 2 sets post?
We used 2 sets of data, 2 days worth of data prior and 2 days worth of data post.
And we also, when Andy went through the sort of historical numbers, when these wide ranges here, in addition to the counts we did, the before counts we did just before the temporary improvements bin, we had a traffic consultant do them many months before. That data is reflected in these first slides. So that is where we have sort of 4 counts.
Got it.
In the general background. But the comparative data is the September counts compared to the October counts.
Got it. So it's the same size data sets on both sides of the pre and post.
Correct.
Okay. And another question is, do we limit any street in terms of volume? Are there any ordinance that states that we can only have a certain amount of volume on that street?
No.
No. And I would just ask maybe the final and obvious question: does staff think that the measures that we put in, were they effective in driving the volume in a dispersed and appropriate way? You mentioned there was a bullet on the slide that said traffic was dispersed. Do we feel that it was effectively dispersed?
So I think we're comfortable presenting the results. This is what happened.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And I don't mean to sound flippant, Commissioner. The idea here is there's so many trade-offs and different ways of looking at this issue. We're very comfortable showing this data. How effective is it depends on sort of the measure you're putting forth. If you're concerned about shifting of traffic and changing of sort of character of the neighborhood, that's a different set of answers than did it reduce speeds on Prairie. So there's just so many facets of this discussion. So we'll start with, we just wanted to present sort of what the data is showing us.
Our intentions here, what drove this were the goals, as I recall them, were to reduce the severity and frequency of accidents at that intersection. We didn't set any goals, I don't believe, as it relates to particular traffic volumes anywhere. Correct?
Correct. And when Andy went through the background, when we initiated this, at the same time staff was noticing a concern for a high frequency and severity of accidents at Forest and Prairie, we also were contacted by a resident right there in the corner, Mr. Erickson, with the same set of concerns. So when we started this, the narrow focus was to reduce the frequency and severity of car accidents at that location.
Okay. Andy, this is a little bit of probably a rabbit trail, but following up on Commissioner Gilmartin's question about, I know we don't ordinance any limits, but am I correct that it's sort of historical volume data that we use to, when we designate streets as things like collectors and thoroughfares and things? I mean, that affects policy decisions like snow plowing orders and things like that, right? That's based on historical volume data, is that correct?
It is. The number of cars, the average daily traffic, the volume tends to affect how we label a street and categorize it, right? And there's some rules of thumb that are out there that traffic planners and traffic engineers use. And then it starts to drive policy decisions like snowplow routes and priorities.
Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
Leslie, go ahead.
Leslie, please.
Yeah, kind of along with that, do we have an idea for example, like 6,000 cars on that small stretch of Prairie, like subjectively seems high to me, but in terms of planners, do we have an idea for, would we expect to see 6,000 cars a day on Prairie and 2,400 cars a day on Forest? That seems high, especially given now, even after closing this portion, we're only seeing 500 on one and a few hundred more on another. Seems real small compared to the volume that we were seeing on Forest. So are those typical, are those volumes on those two streets that we were discussing before what you would have expected based on the historical data we have on streets similar to that, or was that a little bit higher, and did that lead into why we decided to do this study in the first place?
So the range, there's a lot there in the question. Make sure I get all that.
Sure.
There's an idea of sort of, is this sort of expected or sort of within the rules of thumb of not just in our village, but communities throughout Chicago?
Yeah.
I think the traffic numbers on the side streets on Prairie that range from very small down to 150 on some of the side streets to up into 600, 700, 800, 900s. Based on my urban planning background from many years ago, I think I was taught that was expected range.
Okay.
So I'll pause there to see if Andy, who's got additional expertise in this area, would agree with that.
No, I would agree with that.
I don't have the memory on the Prairie and that number of cars on a street that has those design elements.
Sure.
I don't have an answer to that off the top of my head.
So saying 2,400 on Forest is higher than what we would generally expect on a street like that.
That's, it's relatively subjective because it's
Right.
also network-based.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of those other streets go from Prairie to Warren. They don't have a crossing across the railroad tracks.
Right,
So
exactly. So
it's
that one
subjective.
does make it different.
Yeah, it does make a difference.
I think, would we expect to see those volumes given its characteristics of one of only 3 crossings of the railroad? Yes.
Sure.
That's why it's doing that.
Yeah.
One of
That's
the
why it's a
reasons.
unique intersection.
When that last, just for some additional context, maybe in that last set of information from the Prairie, the western end of Prairie, we saw the Saratoga numbers, right, which were 2,000-ish. Again, because it kind of goes somewhere, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? It takes you to the stoplight on Ogden Avenue, so this Forest at this point also takes you to the crossing at the railroad. So there would be, I think we would probably expect throughout town, various situations where network-driven rates would be higher than others. Rich?
Yeah, a couple of questions, mostly for the people here and watching at home. The current speed limit on Forest is 20 miles per hour, correct?
Yes, I believe
And
so.
it's been that way for many, many years?
Since before I was here, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so all the streets under village jurisdiction and control by default are set at speed limits of 25 miles an hour. Every street that has a different speed limit than that under village jurisdiction is done so by ordinance of this council. We did some research and found that Forest Avenue was the subject of an ordinance establishing a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Anecdotally, just sort of asking some long-timers around here, we think that was done in the 90s, perhaps. We're going to hear more. We're going to hear from residents who will correct me on that. So, but it's been since before I was here, I think. So.
And then by default, then Prince is at 25 miles an hour currently. And I don't know if anyone at the dais or if you recall the speed numbers on Forest when we collected that.
I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay. That it?
I just had another question. Sure. Mayor, thank you. To follow up on your question about sort of the categorization of streets, right? We don't have an ordinance, but there's certain categorizations. Did the change in traffic to any of the streets that were measured change their categorizations?
Not to my knowledge.
And a segue to that, how do we categorize Forest, the 4,800 block of Forest now? Is that a collector street? Is it a residential street?
Have to look at our color-coded map.
We can do some research into that. Sometimes I feel like the sort of naming of streets in categories takes on more significance, right, than this context. I think the idea here is you try to come up with some sort of labeling and categorization to help you make other policy decisions like snowplow routes, for example. So,
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, those names could be, you know, A, B, C, D, E,
Right.
1, 2, 3, 4. To Dave's point, we have maintenance-related things, service-related things that we have to prioritize.
Right.
So we end up using that as part of the method by which we prioritize stuff.
But I think
Yeah, sure.
those would be based on traffic volumes, correct? That would be one factor that would establish whether that was a Category A plow street or a Category C plow street.
Well,
Yes, that would be one of the
networking
factors,
too
right?
is right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, any other council questions, comments? All right, we have a full house, and I'm just guessing that most of you folks, since you didn't have a lot of interest in the development on the west end of Ogden earlier, would probably like to tell us your thoughts on this subject as we get an update here. So if that's what you're here for, please respect each other, take your time, come on down to the microphone and tell us what you're thinking.
Thank you, Mayor Barnett. Thank you, Commissioners, for taking the time for this very important and problematic issue. I'm Danielle Bernadine. I'm from the 4800 block of Prince. As we just learned, we have an average of 32 miles an hour on our block on a 25-mile-an-hour road. That's obviously very problematic. Now, when we look back at the data, it looked like from 2015 to 2021, there were 24 accidents at Forest and Prairie, so that averages to about 4 accidents a year. Of course, now with the dead end and a 3-way stop, you're going to have 0 accidents. So it's really going to support your data to say, yes, this was effective, we have no more accidents. Well, we're just waiting for the shoe to drop at Prince and Prairie, because it's going to happen. Almost accidents are happening every single day at that corner. I know we're all on the same page that we're very solution-focused. We want a solution, and the current temporary solution has clearly eliminated this problem at Forest and Prairie. I agree that stop signs were needed. A 4-way stop would be my recommendation for safe pedestrian passage. We want all of our kids to be able to walk to school and enjoy the fact that we live in a community where we can walk to several different schools. Also, we want to reduce the accidents at Forest and Prairie. The dead end has relocated traffic directly to our block of Prince. as we all saw here. 150 plus 200 more cars a day, it may not seem like a lot, but when you're on a brick street, it compounds the noise. People driving 32 miles an hour on a 25-mile-an-hour road is extremely unsafe. It's only a matter of time until somebody gets hurt. As you were describing the characteristics of Forest, I made a couple of notes because we said historically this road has had 1,600 to 2,000 cars a day, right? It's one block off of Main Street. It is one of the 3 downtown crossings. You have Washington, Main, and Forest of the tracks. The tracks have been there since 1865. It connects the library, been there since the 50s, and it goes all the way to North, that has been there since 1928. Forest Avenue is a through street, is not new. While we need to reduce the accidents, of course, at Forest and Prairie, we cannot eliminate it as a through street. The temporary solution has unfortunately simply just passed the buck to Prince, and I don't think we should be the bearer of that. Prince is 4 blocks long. It's a brick street. When the plows come through, they do leave a considerable amount of snow. So I'm very worried about what's going to happen this winter with this increase in traffic and the ability for the drivers to be able to actually maneuver on the street. The added risk to Prince and the impatient drivers, we see it every single day. We obviously just learned about the increased speeds. Effective government does not band-aid issues and it creates undue stress elsewhere. Effective government solves problems that are best for most. I would really request your consideration to make Prairie and Forest a 4-way stop, eliminate the dead end, increase the sight lines right there at Forest and Prairie. I understand that trees were trimmed. It's still very dark. We could use a street light there. That may help. The flashing stop signs, the fact that there's a flashing stop sign there, people are stopping, suggested stopping. They're rolling, they're doing the California roll, but they're slowing down. We saw a 10-mile-an-hour decrease in front of my house. I'm at the corner of Prince and Prairie. 10 miles an hour, that's considerable for a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old that play outside all the time. Our bricks must be preserved. Please do not just relocate the issue to our street. That is not a solution. Let's create a solution that effectively helps the issues at their intersection before we have some irreversible consequences at our intersection of Prince and Prairie. Thank you.
Thank you. Hang on one second, if you would, please. Guys, you can do a head count around the room. If everybody gets 5 minutes and everybody gets an applause, I'm going to be here a really long time. I know there are some people, I can probably guess at least a few of them that I recognize, who will applaud one set of comments and another group will applaud another. The applause is not what motivates this group up here, okay? Please, let's just leave the applause out of the whole thing, keep the conversation flowing, and let's keep everybody with an opportunity to address the microphone and us to process it all. Please.
Good evening, Cindy Zeski, 1130 Franklin Street. I second everything Danielle just said, so I won't repeat any of that. And I believe you all know how I feel about Prince Street, so I don't need to comment further on that either. I just don't want Franklin forgotten. I'm on the corner there, and as you saw in those numbers, 1,500 cars are now turning on Franklin. I live on the corner of Prince and Franklin, so I'm now getting 1,500 cars in front of my house and an extra 300 or 400 or 500 down Prince. When I bought my home, I sat in my house and I listened. We actually sat on the people's couch and I said, I don't want a busy street. I can't live like that. And now I'm on a busy street. I honestly can say to all of you, I would not have bought my home. This temporary barrier has changed how I feel about my home, where I live, where my family comes. I'm not happy in my own house.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Robin Rutkowski. I'm on the 4700 block of Prince Street, and I'm coming up first. I have a number of my neighbors who are here who will probably speak
in more detail than I will, but I would like to know to whom to give our petition to have the barrier removed. Added. Hi, Dave. How are you? I want to say the situation reminds me a lot of when my kids, Flat Stanley, went to an Alaskan village, and the kids in the village sent back advice about when you see a bear. When you see a bear, they gave all the things that you should do and not do, and they especially said, don't chase the bear to your neighbor's house. And I kind of feel like right now with the barrier, we're kind of having that situation where we've chased a bear from one area into another. We're all concerned about the safety. We all are glad that there are less accidents there. I'm 4 houses in, and I could hear the crashes a block away, but we also have issues on our street. I am north of Prairie. We moved there. We expect the fact that we will have a certain amount of traffic. And as our community grows, we understand that traffic's going to increase to a certain level. However, the amount of traffic that we're getting is not necessary if that were to be a 4-way stop, or if you were to look at other options, make that block of forest one way, I don't know. But it seems an unnecessary amount of traffic that we don't have to have. We expect to grow with our city and have that happen, but we hope that barrier is creating a whole different situation. So I am on Bob Burnett's Facebook page, so it was very interesting to read the comments people were putting forth today, and I'm sure that Bob enjoys my Facebook page as well. But one of the things that I found very interesting was somebody pointed out that there are much more cars that go through the intersection of Prairie and Washington than we're going through Forest and Prairie, and that they have significantly less amounts of accidents there. So I would hope that we could use that as an example of what a 4-way stop could do, give it a chance, evaluate that situation before considering something as drastic as keeping that as a permanent dead end at Forest. So thank you very much for your attention, and leaving the rest to my neighbors.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in?
My name is Steve Scarlatti. I actually live on Forest. And I actually think that the people on Prince are proving what our point has been for about 20 years. They're concerned, everybody's concerned with safety, but what they don't want is volume. And what they're talking about now isn't safety, it's volume. They want to put the traffic back on Forest, because that's what they want. They don't want the traffic on their street. Well, guess what? Neither do we. And don't tell me that I just bought a house on a street that's a dead end, for Pete's sake. It's not a through street. It's a dead end. It dead ends at the high school. And the traffic, you can't say, well, at Forest Avenue, people are heading towards the train crossing, because we don't have southbound traffic on Forest. The majority of our traffic is northbound on Forest. So it's going to a dead end. They're bypassing Main Street. In fact, Prince and Saratoga and everybody else, we shouldn't be pointing the finger at each other.
Hey, Steve.
We should be united. The problem is volume that needs to be where it's supposed to be, Main Street. And for our fellow residents that weren't at all of the other meetings, that weren't discussing all the other issues and other options, that are now here trying to remove what we've worked so hard to finally get in place, it's not complete. The other end of that, the other half of the project was to get people to stop turning left on Franklin and going to Prince and going to Saratoga, but instead making a right turn lane, or forcing them to take a right off of Forest as they when they get to Franklin, forcing them to turn right instead of left, and going to Main Street. We haven't been able to coordinate the lights at Franklin and coordinate it with the light at Prairie so that more people are ideally going to Main Street. You'll see half of them have been split. You've taken half of the traffic off of the streets and sent it to Main Street, and yes, the other half is going to Prairie. And you aren't even close to what our 2,400 a day count is. Our own village has said that an acceptable count is up to 900 on a residential street. Well, guess what, guys? We're a residential street that's been carrying 2,400 cars a day for the last 20 years. And we have been working on this for quite a long time. Not to push the traffic onto Prince and not to push the traffic onto Saratoga, but to push the traffic onto Main Street. If you take out the dead end, they will go down Forest. Whether you've got stop signs there or not, they will, because that's their bypass. They're using Forest as a bypass. So I'm sorry we've tried to disperse some of the traffic that has been on our shoulders for the last 20 years to some of the other streets and get it to spread out, which your dead end has done. Thank you very much. We worked very hard for that zero. But the whole idea was to get.
Hey, Steve, hang on one second. I'm going to let you continue. Just hang on a second. So in almost 2.5 years, I have avoided using this. And seriously, this is really dumb. When a room full of 60 or 70 residents who all live within a mile of each other can't control themselves enough that I have to bang a hammer on a table. We're going to give everybody a chance to speak, but we're going to speak to each people at the podium speaking to the council. That's the limit of it, okay, guys? We're not going to do applause. We're not going to do back and forth jabbing. Everybody will get their turn, but let's keep it in this process. When you wait your turn, you go to the podium, you speak to this group, and then we'll go to the next person, okay? Go ahead, Steve.
The fact of the matter is, if you don't have the dead end, you're going to have, and you just have stop signs, you're going to be back to the 2,400 count of cars going down Forest, going through the stop sign and taking a right. Okay, we're still going to have that same volume again. The dead end is the only thing that stops that. Okay, we can't put a gate down at the end of Forest Avenue that opens and closes. Okay, 5 cars can come. The rest of you have to be dispersed to the rest of the neighborhood. You know. If a stop sign is not going to change the volume, and volume was an issue as part of the safety concerns. It was a twofold problem that was causing the safety on at that intersection. It was volume and it was speed. Okay, you can't address the volume aspect of that problem without putting in that dead end. There have been no accidents there. That's great. There have been no accidents at Prairie either. Your own study showed that there's a far better sight line at Prince. And again, I'm not trying to push the traffic onto Prince. None of us wanted to push the traffic to Prince or west or to Saratoga. Nobody wanted that. The idea was to force them onto Main Street. And with a few more steps and a little bit more time, I believe you'll see the traffic volume start to come down even on Prince, because people aren't going to want to do that. They're not going to want to drive on those brick streets, especially if you go down what you ought to do is not repair the bricks, because you got a pothole you can't drive down, you cannot drive down Oakwood faster than 5 miles an hour. You'll rip your tires off on those bricks. So again, the goal was not to push the traffic. We should all be united in an effort to get all of that traffic west of Main Street back onto Main Street. Certainly not saying, well, we want our quiet lifestyle of a street, so let's put it all back on Forest. I mean, that's just not fair.
Thanks, Steve.
Cindy Zeski, 1130 Franklin Street. And with all due respect to the last comment, nobody wants to push any kind of hazard back onto anyone's street. In fact, we have come up with an idea of how to help with the problem. Nobody wants accidents on any street. I know a lot of people on Forest. I don't want them to have to live like that.
That's not the issue. No one is saying, I don't want zero, except for them. I mean, they have 0 cars on their street. 0. Of course they're going to have no accidents. We, as a town, are growing. We're getting bigger. We just built a huge apartment complex 2 blocks down from Forest, on Forest. Beautiful, gorgeous. Those are the people using the streets. I talk to the police officers. They say they use it because they don't want to be on Main Street. I don't want to hurt anyone on Forest. That is not the intent of any of the people living on Prince. We just don't want it loaded all onto us, and they have 0 cars. It has not dissipated. It's gotten worse. And in regard to that, here's our little drawing from our block. Here's our petition from Franklin and Prince saying we want a different solution. We don't want people to be miserable because we understand. We are now too. We get it. No one should be miserable. But it's unfair to say we're doing something intentionally.
Any other questions or comments?
Hi, good evening. Mark Brenner, 4700 block of Prince Street. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, and Andy, thank you for emailing me back with my questions. I just got kind of a list of things, maybe not in any particular order. We, on Prince Street, did not get notification of these TAP meetings, even though they would have affected us. I look at the mail every day. I didn't get anything about the March meeting nor the September meeting. I don't think anyone that I've talked to on our block is against the stop signs at Forest. We're all for having our fair share of the traffic that is mainly heading to Downers Grove North, and that's why Forest is so busy. It's people coming over the tracks and heading up to the high school, I think. In terms of, I think so, we don't have any problem with like mitigation things. We have a problem with this blockade or the cul-de-sac. I have concerns about safety as well for my own family. I've got 2.5 teenage drivers. And they have to pull out onto Prince, and it's if you've been on the 4700 block of Prince, there's a large hill. It's a hill that becomes difficult to navigate in the winter when it's snowy. I've seen even the garbage trucks not be able to make it up. So it makes it hard to see anyway when you're pulling out onto Prince. So I worry about my kids getting T-boned. I worry about the smaller kids on the block. There's 2 new basketball courts in the front yards, like the Gorilla things. When their ball goes out into Prince, just a lot more traffic there now. Some of the statistics that were shown earlier, I don't know, I feel like they were glossed over. 136% increase in traffic on Prince isn't a small increase. That's pretty huge. And I don't know why a 12% increase in speed was characterized as a slight increase in speed. I think I'd like a slight reduction in my property taxes then. Skipping things that were already said. The village has chosen, I think, the most extreme thing to mitigate this. You did not try a 4-way stop, speed bumps, more serious enforcement of existing laws, turning Forest into a 1-way street, restrictions based on the time of day. It's been mentioned that the Forest Street traffic goes to 0, while Prince goes from moderate to pretty busy. I don't see where the equity is in that. I don't see how that's fair. And as you can see, it's dividing the community. This is not a good thing that's going on in the northwest section of Downers Grove. There's a lot of anger, and I think people feel like it's not being fairly decided. I don't understand why, if we've had a large study going on for years or whatever, a year, about Prairie and slowing down traffic, why the Forest intersection wasn't included as part of that. I don't know why this is a one-off thing where we've got 3 or maybe 4 based on tonight's stop signs going in, but this one isn't. It's just its own thing. To me, it's all one. Maine to Belmont should be one study, and it should be studied in aggregate. So the studies should be combined. If there are increased accidents in Prince, and I know this is anecdotal, I was walking my dog last night and there was almost a T-bone with one person beeping and the other person turning left, the same thing that was happening on Forest is going to just move over to Prince and Saratoga. I think you're going to find we're going to want a cul-de-sac too. And then Saratoga's going to want one. And everybody does. Everybody would like to have a zero traffic street. But the thing is, we moved into a neighborhood where we can walk to school and we can walk to downtown, and that means there's a lot of traffic. And, you know, we're never going to have zero traffic. We're, I think, okay with our fair share, but not all of it. And you're also changing the traffic pattern that has been here for 100 years, I guess, or more. I think the entire subdivision, the former E.H. Prince subdivision, should be involved in this decision, not just the people on the 4800 block of Forest, who obviously are for this because it benefits them immensely. It's going to increase their home values. It's going to make their street great. It's like a block party every day. So I guess those are my final comments. Appreciate your consideration.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Martinez, 4807 Prince. I used to live on a busy street, kind of like, it was a secondary street in Westmont, how the poor people on Forest have, and 14 years there, nothing I could do about the great amount of traffic, so I left, and I moved to Prince, this quiet little street. I think that the four-way stops, and I think adding another stop towards Woodard is going to eliminate that. It's very enticing for people to use Prairie right now as a through street. Everybody wants to get there, no matter how they get there, no matter what street they race up. And Forest has always been traditionally a secondary street. But I think eliminating a high-speed street and inconveniencing people on Prairie, slowing them down, they're going to find other routes. They're not going to be going down Forest as much as they are. They're definitely not going to be, our street will go back to normal. I think Forest will probably drop because it's not that enticing to use Prairie as much anymore, because that ability to go from Maine to Belmont is gone now. And we're all going to see this. We don't need data. The next meeting, it's going to be all the people on Warren complaining, just like everybody on Prairie. We know this. Come on. I feel for you guys. We're neighbors. We're friends. We're pals. I appreciate you guys doing these stop signs on Prairie. I think you should add one more for the people on the west end. Inconvenience the driver, slow them down, make it that this street sucks. I don't want to take this one anymore. Well, they're going to go to Chicago too. That's going to be another issue. Add stop signs. If it slows people down, so what? If they want to go fast, go to Ogden, go to Maine, stay off the residential streets. You guys are doing a good job. Just put in the stop sign and let the police do their job.
Thank you.
Sonia Samara, 4637 Forest. I think the stop signs might be a good answer to what's going on Prairie. That's the problem. Forest Avenue, when I moved there 30 years ago, I knew I had a high school at one end, a crossing at the other, crossing the tracks. I expected traffic from parents dropping off their kids, especially in inclement weather. We expect that. But Forest Avenue is a through street to go across the tracks. If you want to close that, that's another story. But for me to have to make 4 turns now to go to the library from the 4600 block, it just doesn't make any sense. And that's me and everybody else that's north of Prairie. So the stop signs and what you're trying to do are all very good. But having a barricade on a street, it just doesn't make sense to me or a lot of people. Thank you. Thank you for working. It's a lot of effort for you guys to do and hear us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Melissa Brenner from the 4700 block of Prince. Just a brief question, comment, with no disrespect to the folks on Forest, because I understand that it's not desirable to have that much traffic. I just question whether the point of this
exercise is to improve the safety of vehicular traffic on Forest and Prairie, or to improve the property enjoyment of the people living on Forest. Because when you talk about their inconvenience and not liking the amount of traffic that they have to deal with on their street, it doesn't feel like we're talking about vehicular safety anymore. And that was the point, I thought, of the whole start of the discussion. And I think we're losing that when we talk about getting past putting a four-way stop, which seems to really solve a lot of the problem, and putting in a barricade at the end of the road. So I just would like you to consider that. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Andy Hardy. I came after my basketball game, so I'm going to be winging this. I didn't think I was going to be having any time up here. I sent some emails to you guys, so that's probably how you know me. I appreciate the responses too, because I know you guys are super busy. But bottom line, I'll just reiterate, like, yeah, I think the point is we're trying to just reduce speeds. Like, we're trying to prevent that accident at Forest and Prairie, right? So I don't understand how we didn't address the Prairie situation first. Like I mean, there's kids crossing streets every day trying to cross Prairie. It's like Frogger trying to get us across the street. Like, I don't understand how we didn't address that first before we jumped to this barricade. It just seems so illogical. Like, it just, like, I get it that you want to just stop the bleeding, the hemorrhaging, like, yeah, there's no more accidents, but like, do the right thing and prevent the speeding. You said that the speeding's gone down too, and some of you have said, oh yeah, the situation's great, the speeding's gone down. That's not because of the blockade, it's because there's a stop sign right there. Like, that's just obvious. Like, those aren't correlated, right? And, you know, as the other thing is, you know, as Chris alluded to with the ordinance about the volume, like, if there's no volume ordinance, why are we even talking about volume? Like, there's streets in Washington. I used to live on Curtis Street. I moved away from Curtis Street. I mean, there's cars zipping down there. You know, like, there's streets all over Downers Grove that have tons of volume. But we're not building cul-de-sacs there. Main Street has tons of residential area. Prairie has more volume than Forest does. It doesn't have a business on it from Belmont to Main Street. We're not building cul-de-sacs there. Like, by doing that, you guys have singly, like, increased their property value tremendously. You know, like, I don't blame the guy. Like, I would want a cul-de-sac too. Like, how do I petition for one? I'd love to do that, you know? It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's just not logical. So if we're really trying to reduce speeds and prevent the crashes, let's do the right thing and really solve the problem. And so many people have come up and said that, but I just don't get why it's not so clear. Like, Prairie is the issue. It's not Forest, it's a Prairie issue, right? So, yeah, so basically just, so yeah, that's basically what I can say. I appreciate your time, and I know this is busy, like a busy time for you guys, and yellow. And I know that Prince Street should have been here earlier, right? We didn't know. We weren't paying attention. I saw the stop sign, and I was like, oh yeah, they finally put a stop sign on Prince. Somebody finally listened to somebody. And then I heard about the crash later, and I was like, yeah, that does stink, right? Somebody blew through a stop sign, which somebody else alluded to, that you have to blow through 2 stop signs to have a crash, right? Especially stop signs that people aren't used to, right? They're gonna end up getting used to them. And why didn't we think about putting one on Prince? Let's make it clogged up, just like what you said, Mayor. You told us before that you want to just clog up the street, because then that means that people are obeying the law and setting the speeds. I do have one more thing I wanted to say, is the speeds that I noticed in your guys' study was 26 miles an hour going down Forest. North of, on Forest, above Prairie, it was faster than that. So I guess I'm not really sure I understand about why the speed was that much bigger of an issue. I mean, people go 38 miles an hour down Main Street in a 20 mile per hour zone after that girl just died on Main Street. Like, we could be doing this all day on every single street in Downers Grove, but we're choosing to pick one street because 10 people put a petition together to make a cul-de-sac in the middle of downtown Downers Grove. Like, I get where they're coming from. I would want the same thing, and I get the volume, but the volume for me is a non-starter. There's no ordinance that says you can't have the volume. So I guess that's just where I'm at. It's like, are we trying to reduce the speeds, or are we trying to just reduce the volume? Like, are we trying to prevent crashes? That's just reducing the volume. Make people go through stop signs. Done. That's it. At the end of the day. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Robin Rutkowski, 4700 block of Prince again. Was our block included in the study that you guys did?
We have 3 or 4 studies that are sort of pieces of this conversation that are in there. Could you clarify the areas that we were considering? This was a traffic study a long time ago.
The north leg of Forest or the Prairie, is that what you're talking about, Mr. Rutkowski?
Yes.
Okay. So that area was part of neighborhood
Well,
traffic.
I'm sorry, north of on Prince Street, not Forest.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. This general area was neighborhood traffic study number 2 in 2012. Neighborhood traffic study number 7 was the area on the west side. The analysis and work at the intersection of Prairie and Forest was initiated this round several months ago in the spring. And then the corridor plan for Prairie from Belmont to Maine came about because of a lot of the issues and comments that we learned about both at neighborhood traffic study number 7 and the discussion of this. So the last time we took a look at this neighborhood north of Prairie specifically as part of this actual study was 2012.
I asked this as a 20-plus year resident on Prince Street that, again, we know we live on the same street as the high school. So we know that there are certain considerations we have to make by virtue of that location. But I can tell you that generally people don't think about the fact that cars are going to end up on their front lawns. I know that happened to people on Forest too, but I don't know if you know that's happened on Prince. I'm the 4th house in from Prairie. In that, we've had 3 cars on lawns. My dad got to watch my dog get hit by a speeder and kill it, and they didn't stop, they just continued on. We have our own traffic issues. We have not brought them to the council in the same fashion, you know, I guess, because we're kind of like we're on a busy street. We have to understand there's certain things, but I hope that you all will extend your study to our street. Because if people are not on Forest and their kids are late to school, they are on our street and they are going fast. Because I think that's what we're kind of assessing here, is that the speeds are higher as you're approaching the high school. It's not the kids. The kids are parking in the parking lot on Main. It's us parents, and our kids are late. So more enforcement is probably one of the biggest assets you could provide for our quadrant. And, you know, again, we know that we're going to have some more traffic, but should we have to bear as much as that? It seems inequitable for the circumstances, and especially with the further development coming, you know, we're all going to get some more. But you need to consider that we have some safety issues on our block as well. They include accidents, they include people who are going faster, and this new plan for Prairie may do just the ticket. It may make it much safer. Or if we're right between Saratoga and Forest, Prince is going to be right at the high point of where people can accelerate before they have to slow down for the next stop sign. So we might be coming back here, you know, in a year from now saying we need more help too. So just add us into your consideration, into your plan, and it would have been great to have known about this ahead of time so that we're not coming in so late in the game and trying to catch up on all the things that have already gone down, which we appreciate everybody looking into the safety issues. But one further thing, and Mark had mentioned it too, I actually will go on next door, Pierce Downer. I will tell people when it is snowing, don't drive north on our street. The bricks are slippery, but it's the snow and trying to get up that elevation. We have, the garbage trucks have trouble. We have, you know, we've gone out and helped people numerous times. Sometimes it's for entertainment. We sit and watch out the window and watch people try to go up the hill. But if you are going to put that more people in that situation, we're going to have crashes in front of our house. So just adding that to the mix of things for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maggie Slouzis. I'm on the 4700 block of Prince. Wasn't planning to speak, and I don't want to be redundant. Just want to emphasize a couple things. I live in what is known as, and the village has actually indicated to me, is the sink basin of 4700 block of Prince. There is a slope and a camber that comes right in front of my house. Everything, water, I have 3 rivers in my backyard because of the water flow. And I am the one who's had a car come into my front yard over bushes and get stuck at 4 a.m. I am the one who's had my neighbor tell me, you will want to go outside and help cars go up the street because they're going to get stuck in front of your house. Please don't do that. They will slide back onto you. A garbage truck ruined the old tree that was in front of our house. It's, as my neighbor said, it's not a safe street necessarily. These were things to the point of forest. Some of these things I knew before I moved in. Some of these things we didn't know when we moved in. That's what happens when you buy a house. There are things that you research and you learn, and there are things that you don't realize. Prince is parking on one side of the street. We have the parking on our side of the street. It's unfortunate. I don't like it, but I can't petition to have that changed, or I guess I could, but I'm not going to. We're part of a community, and we all take our hits, and we all have our pluses and minuses. And so I feel like when I was listening to the people on Prairie down at the West End, I was hearing their point in terms of what is satisfying for the goal, for the majority. Goal being safety. And as my neighbor also said, just the goal being safety, there are some auxiliary things coming into play. I realize volume is awful. We've talked about the history. That is what that street is. When you moved on Forest, there is a train station. There is a high school. That's the nature of the beast. We have parking on our side of the street. The people on Prairie, on the West End, they moved into their house expecting that they had parking. The stop signs, I think they've all agreed, would satisfy the majority of people with the goal. And there could be the sharrows, because I'm an active person. I love the idea of biking, but there needs to be a compromise for the majority. And so I just feel like we've all said pretty much the same thing, that I feel that it doesn't seem that anyone here has any issues with stop signs along Prairie. And I feel like that would satisfy the biggest concern before we go to other measures that impact people not necessarily in a fair way.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynn Graham. I'm with 4600 block of Forest, and I just wanted to know, did you guys actually do a study with just the four-way stop before you put in a blockage? No?
Dave,
Would
you want
guys
to
consider
recount the
doing that?
process to where we got to the current situation? There were a couple of steps in there.
Would you guys consider doing that first before we decide to put in a blockage? Because I'm actually against it. I bought on Forest, knowing it was a thoroughfare, knowing there was going to be a lot of traffic, and I want to be able to get to the high school and to downtown. And I think a blockage is not helping us with the safety of it. It's really just controlling traffic, which is not what this was about.
The question there is, would we consider something else? The process that got us to this point was, I believe, a petition initially, Dave, right?
So this is the background that Andy started us with. Staff and resident noticed a high number of accidents at this intersection. And so staff began working on a plan which included multiple options to reduce frequency and severity of accidents. We took some actions to address that concern. We held a neighborhood meeting that consisted only of folks on Forest Avenue on March 30th. We did some temporary measures in May. We went to Transportation and Parking Commission and Village Council in a series of meetings in July through September, and there were multiple options on the table, including three-way stop signs, four-way stop signs, right in, right out, limitations with pork chops and medians, and closures of both legs of Forest.
So it was, there's a process that got us here. This body, on September 7th, decided to take the step that you see now, which is the 3 stop signs and the closed street. That was selected from a series of options that came to us after 2 or 3 additional transportation and parking meetings. So it doesn't totally answer your question. Would we consider it? We sure might. We did. This is what we chose as the next step.
Okay, I just think if you did that study with the 4 stop signs, which everyone seems to be okay with, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think most of us would be okay with that, and then see if that actually helps not only reduce the flow of traffic, but also to help the safety issues. So.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I could add a comment?
Sure.
There were 23 permutations that were presented to TAP and the Village Council. So one of the things that made this more complicated was which combination do you pick? How do you get 4 people to pick the exact same combination? This was the one that we selected, in addition to the stop signs.
Thank you. Additional comments? Sure, come on back.
Sorry, I just want to say one more thing. With the 4-way stop sign, I think if you did that in conjunction with other stop signs on Prairie, you would eliminate a lot of the traffic going east, and then you wouldn't have the crashes at Forest and Prairie. So I don't think just a 4-way stop is going to do everything. It's going to solve a lot of the problem, but really if we solve Prairie as a whole, in conjunction with that, like I think it'll all work itself out together. It'll be a lot better. I think you guys are going to get way better results. So like if it's just like one thing here, one thing there, the blockade, like yeah, like really we all want to solve Prairie. Right? I hear you guys talking about it all the time. So like if we have more stops there, you're going to have less traffic. You're not going to have as many people going through. Like the one guy on Forest said that a lot of people in this company are just going through there because it's faster to go through Prairie than it is on Ogden. Right? So if you have multiple stops in conjunction with that 4-way stop at Forest and Prairie, I think you're going to see traffic really die down.
Thank you. What else?
The 2 things that I heard this evening, excuse me, that were most helpful to me, one was the observation about Prairie and Washington being a high-volume intersection and how that seems not to have accidents. And I would be curious to understand whether anything has been explored as to why that would be the case on that side, on the east side of Maine, versus what we're talking about on the west side of Maine. And I extend that comment to Prairie all the way to Fairview, because presently my recollection is on Prairie right now, between Maine and Fairview, there are 2 stop signs. Anyone confirm that?
Sounds right.
And now we're talking about the section between Prairie, on Prairie between Maine and Belmont, getting just a plethora of stop signs. And I'm curious as to why there would be such a contrast on one side of Maine versus the other side of Maine. The other comment I found instructive was the observation alluded to tonight, which was mentioned also in earlier meetings, about the significance of the stoplight at at Franklin and Maine, because it sounds to me like that's the problem on Forest, that if in fact you have this volume of northbound traffic using Forest to get to Prairie, to get to Maine, that the reason they're doing that is because the stoplight at Franklin and Maine is not doing the trick at all. And I don't know what other steps can be taken to address that, but it seems like that's a significant issue here. And finally, I agree with the comments made by the people who are saying the barricade seems to be initially overkill. There's the obvious point that if in fact there's concern by the people who are living on Forest that there's going to be this dramatic increase in volume if the barricade is not there, that as people are commenting, if you leave in a four-way stop sign, take down the barricade, treat that as a temporary measure, you find out what the impact on the traffic volume is. I have a final question, though, in terms of mechanics, in terms of methodology. When a volume count is done, how is that actually computed for a long street like Prairie? And a related question in that regard is, if I live on a street and I'm running errands on my street so that I'm in and out of my driveway and going up and down my street, say 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, versus, say, going to work, coming home, and that's it. Does that show up as an increase in volume in terms of the way this is counted? And if so, how is differentiation made between people who are running errands on their street versus traffic that's coming onto their street from people who don't live on the street?
Thanks. Other comments or questions? Okay. Anybody from the council have any additional? Greg?
Mayor, I move that the council direct staff to remove the barrier at Forest and Prairie and install a four-way stop control.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the council on the motion? Chris, please.
I certainly do. I do not support the idea of this motion so shortly after we have started the analysis of whether this barricade is effective. It's important that we keep in mind why we're here. The decision to close Forest was to alleviate an intersection that was far and away an outlier for accidents. 2,300 cars, and I think it was more like 39 accidents, not the 25 that's been passed around in the last 5 years. More importantly, an average of 1 per month in this current year prior to the closure. That data is undisputable. I'm not going to rehash all the reasons we discussed why, but it was clear at the time those commissioners that supported the closure only a few weeks ago agreed something had to be done, and we took the direct recommendation from TAP and temporarily closed Forest. The primary concern from many in the community and our commissioners was that traffic would disperse in a way that would be detrimental to the surrounding streets, a concern that I share. But I would argue the closure was the only way to determine what that impact would be. Again, another effort to collect the data. So I think it's important that we look at the data in a meaningful way to make sure we're talking about the same numbers. There have been numbers floating around out there based on some preliminary traffic counts that I've heard that are not correct, and I hope that Andy's presentation has dispelled any rumors about 300, 400% traffic increases. It's important that we look at the correct data. And I do think it's important to note that that data was made available today based on the counts being completed over the weekend. So I want to make sure that we're all talking about the same data. It's clear to me based on this data that the temporary closure has been effective and that the traffic counts demonstrate the impact on the surrounding streets to be what I would consider acceptable levels based on our expectations. So let's first look at the cars moving north on Forest and turning right on Main, which I think we all agree was the first and primary goal. Almost 60% of the traffic turned that way. So 60% of what was headed up Forest is now going towards Main. These are what the numbers are telling us. If I can have my time.
Hang on, Chris. Just 1 moment. Guys, these meetings only work, public discourse only works when everybody lets everybody have a chance to speak, okay? We went through an extended period of time at meeting number 5 on this subject. It is now, we're going to have a little period of time when the folks in the council are going to speak. We weren't jumping on top of you guys. We'd like to have the same respect at this end as well. Please just let folks up here speak.
Thank you, Mayor. So that's 58% of the traffic going towards Maine, a result I think we all were looking for. Andy also mentioned that there was 10 to 20% of other cars that found other routes that were not mapped out for the survey. So not Saratoga, not Prince, other places. So if we just look at those numbers, 70 to 80% of the traffic has been diverted away from Forest, but also away from Prince and Saratoga. The remaining traffic was split between Prince and Saratoga. Additionally, one of the benefits we saw was traffic reduced on Prairie by 15%. I would argue having to do more with the closure than the stop signs. When you have 2,600 cars or 2,300 cars coming through and they're reduced there, you're going to see a reduction on Prairie. Now, I think what's more important, let's take a look at the impact on Saratoga and Prince. Since there were ranges provided in the data we saw today, I'm going to use the high counts or the busiest traffic days to be conservative on what we're looking at. Saratoga, the data shows that the high traffic count per day prior to the Forest closing was 850. The high traffic count after the closure was 970, 14% increase. While traffic on Prince has doubled, and you'll hear a lot about the 137%, Prince after closure had 590 cars, which is the same volume that Saratoga had prior to the closing. By removing the barricade at this point, the council is sending the message that 600 cars is acceptable on Saratoga, but not acceptable on Prince. We are making decisions in a way that I don't think is data-driven if we go this route. So the bottom line is we did not shift the traffic problem down the street, not by a long shot. The data clearly shows this. We've heard tonight about additional changes that are coming, that may come, I want to be clear, may come to Prairie. The council has not voted on that. And I know that this work appears to be some expectation on that it will improve the situation on Prairie and Forest. If we do what is recommended on Prairie, it will make that improvement and have a halo effect on Forest and Prairie. However, our own staff, in the documentation that we receive, made this comment, and I think it's important to read. Staff believes that the improvements being recommended, this is the Prairie improvements herein, will not significantly influence or be influenced by the ultimate improvements at this location. Certain factors, we're talking about Prairie and Forest here, such as traffic signal at Main, the volume of traffic on Forest, and the site distance issues, create specific considerations at that intersection that are not heavily influenced by traffic controls to the west. However, resulting effects of the proposed improvements from Stonewall to Saratoga may slightly reduce traffic volumes and speed. Staff does not believe these reductions will have a significant impact on that intersection. Now, I think it's extremely important that we work through the issues and the plan that we're discussing on the Prairie improvements. But I think it's premature to remove the barricade while we deliberate that. It only makes sense to work our way through those improvements before we remove something there, and gives us an opportunity to verify the data that we have already seen. And my understanding is we've collected data for 2 days, which is clearly, now my understanding, a standard on how we count numbers. So this is the data that we're basing it off. I'm not sure why there is the rush to pull the barricade, the closure on Forest, within 6 weeks of putting it there. I'm curious to hear why this motion is happening tonight. We only received the data late this morning, and I think pushing it back a few weeks to gather more data, to give staff and council more time for results is not an unreasonable ask. I humbly ask my commissioners, please do not ignore the data, our staff's guidance, TAP's guidance, and please do not vote to remove this barrier. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else want to weigh in? Leslie, please.
Yeah. I will not repeat the things that Commissioner Gilmartin stated. I tried to get to it a little bit earlier of kind of how unique this intersection is, and I can see that reflected in everyone's comments regardless of which side of the issue you're on. The problem that we see at Forest and Prairie is not just because of volume on Prairie. It's also volume on Forest, and also, again, the unique aspects of Forest that make it, because of the railroad crossing and trying to avoid the stoplights and try and speed ahead. Yeah, our goal really is to try and push some of that traffic off. So what Commissioner Gilmartin was referring to is that about 10 to 20% weren't even in the study area at all, and then over half of the vehicles that still ended up going either east or west on Franklin, over half of them ended up going east. So the majority of the vehicles, so we're talking about around, we said somewhere between 2,000 and 2,400 cars a day would go down Forest. We're now just seeing 450 to 750 of those go westbound. 450 to 750, and I have the slide up on my screen right now. I'm sure we can go back to it. It's slide number 15. It says westbound increased 450 to 750 vehicles, which does mean that the total eastbound, westbound is 1,550 on that portion, but the actual increase itself going westbound is only 450 to 750 vehicles. And again, that's split about half and half between Prince and Saratoga. I won't repeat all of the numbers that my fellow commissioner referenced about, the numbers for Saratoga versus Prince. Again, I empathize with having more traffic down your street. I know what that feels like. I have experienced that where I am. I'm very close to where 55th was under construction, and I know what it's like to have more people speeding down your street and have a lot of families around. So I'm not trying to discount that change and what that feels like as a resident of that neighborhood. But I do think that only about 6 weeks into this and seeing numbers that honestly were better than I think I could have even expected in terms of how we are dispersing the traffic, I agree that it is premature to remove this barrier. And I have to agree, I'm not sure why we are doing this so quickly after we put it up to begin with, and before we start to get some of these other traffic calming measures on Prairie. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Leslie. Rich.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. First of all, I wanted to reiterate, in my mind, in order of importance, the problems we were trying to solve here. First of all, it was the sheer number of accidents on Prairie and Forest. We've quoted 24 in a 6-year period. However, that cadence has increased. That we took that study from January of 2015 through April of 2021, and then after April, we've literally had one accident per month. So now we've had 28. The cadence has increased to 28 per month. We now know that we've had excessive speed on Prairie. We have had incidents of people blowing through the stop sign, even when other temporary barricades were there. One of our initial attempts to control that, people were literally turning the wrong way on oncoming traffic, creating an even more dangerous situation. The first thing we tried was 20 years ago was a no left turn. And we did not go back to the well in trying to do anything in that 20-year period. Hopefully we won't have that kind of period of time for the next thing. The other thing that concerned me was excessive speed on Forest. I could be wrong with this number, but I thought I remember reading 28 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. That's a 40%, people going 40% over the speed limit, which is unacceptable to me. And then anecdotally, people going as high as 45 miles an hour on Forest. And then the final issue was excessive traffic on Forest. So that was kind of the order of priority. I do believe that the four-way stop signs, or now the all-way stop signs, have done a good job at the accidents. I also think that what we end up doing on Prairie with the additional stop signs will help solve that particular problem, so I'm satisfied with that answer. I stated early and repeatedly that I really would like to have a way to divert that traffic onto Main Street because it is specifically an arterial street. That's what we call it. Even if you look in the parcel navigator, I believe we call it that. I was concerned and expressed that concern that I didn't want to transfer the problem from Forest to Prince, and I told people I was not expecting a situation where we had 3 or 4 rows of angry people from Forest being replaced by 3 or 4 rows of angry people on Prince. So I'm satisfied with the accidents. I still don't think that we have solid enough things that we're planning that would make me satisfied that we're actually going to solve the problem. And I guess my attitude is solve the core problem, identify what the core problem is, and I don't care as much how it's solved, but I didn't want to create a scenario that we change the way of life and the people on Prince and Saratoga because of that. So literally looking for my colleagues who are in support of this. I'm sitting here undecided right now, and I wanted to hear what all you had to say, and I'd like to hear what my colleagues propose to solve these problems in a concrete way, and in a real immediate way, like within the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, Rich. Greg, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think the place to start is that we wouldn't be talking about the intersection of Forest and Prairie without the wrecks. It's about the crashes that take place that led to the conversation. Traffic volume is an issue at many, many intersections. We've heard different references to even the idea that Washington and Prairie is more heavily traveled. That may well be. I haven't done the study on that. But traffic volume is expected in all kinds of different places. The reason we started talking about this was the safety of the intersection. The idea that somehow we can't control the safety with anything but a barrier, I think, is asinine. The idea was, yes, you've got a lot of traffic. Yes, you've got a lot of speed. And you've got some sightline issues. So I think, and this is where Commissioner Colavani's 3-way stop from several weeks ago, I think was instructive. We have seen that the installation of those stop signs at that intersection on Prairie, eastbound and westbound, has slowed traffic through the intersection, and it's actually resulted in a 12 to 15% reduction in the traffic volume. I believe that traffic volume will continue to reduce as the free flow of traffic is restricted further once we install the other stop signs. So if your goal is truly safety, all of the concerns can be handled with the stop signs. You're going to have a problem seeing a car with somewhat limited visibility that's going 30 to 40 miles an hour. You're not going to have a problem seeing it when it's stopped dead right next to you. So if we're talking about safety, let's talk about safety. Let's talk about dealing with the problem where it is. Now, we also know, and you can get lost in the raw numbers all you want, but we have seen a more than double the traffic on Prince, and we've seen it go up by about 50% on Saratoga. Now, if that were my street, I'd be sitting right out here where all of you are. We want to talk about, previous council meetings and previous discussions and, where people voted. We can do that. But if you back up to September 7th, and then you go back to the previous meeting before that, you find that it was 7-0 in favor of a 4-way stop. 7-0. And I can pull up the minutes and read them back if you want. So, what changed between the end of August and the beginning of September? One crash. One. If you want to talk about making data-driven decisions, let's talk about data and the fact that we've got 100% increase plus on one street and 50% on another. And let's talk about the fact that we can control the accidents at Forest and Prairie by doing something less than a blockade. And the reason we're talking about it now is because, while some might think it's premature to talk about this now, because we prematurely put the blockade in place in the first place. So, I've been up here for 8.5 years, and I did not hear anything from anybody on the 4800 block of Forest before 2021. I'm sorry. We would have taken steps additionally if we had been hearing about it. I know I didn't hear about it.
What is your question exactly?
I wasn't asking a question, I was making a statement.
Guys,
So, bottom line, there are less drastic ways to deal with the problem of the crashes at Forest and Prairie than blocking the street off and causing problems for the rest of the neighborhood. The most responsible way to go is to take one of those less restrictive options. That is to put the four-way stop in place. It's to put the other stop signs in place down Prairie, which will have a even more of an effect on the eastbound traffic that has been one of the principal drivers of those wrecks. Now, once those are in place and we get to the spring construction season, we can start talking about ways to continue to narrow the street on Prairie and then take other traffic calming steps to narrow the street on Forest that will then deal with some of the other concerns. Unfortunately, we can't do it all at once unless we want to rack up all kinds of construction costs and hope that we beat the snow. I'm not sure we want to do that. But we can take the reasonable measures now to fix the safety issues as well as restore the status quo ante for the rest of the neighborhood so that they're not dealing with dramatic increases in traffic. Thank you, Mayor.
thank you, Greg. Anyone else want to weigh in? Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. This is again, we talk about this all the time, highly emotional issue. Not only for residents, but truly for all of us up here. I mean, you can hear the passion anytime one of us speaks. And, you know, we may not agree, but please know that we think about these things when we're working out in the morning, when we are at work, before we go to bed at night. At least I do. These issues weigh heavily on me, and I really try and take the time to consider everybody's opinion and every angle of these issues. And so if my fellow commissioners will indulge me, I would just like to walk through my whole process in this so that it's kind of out there. On the August 3rd meeting on this was the very first meeting. In my notes and publicly I mentioned that I had a fear of impacting other streets like Prince and Saratoga. At the August 17th council meeting, I stated I was very hesitant to close a street, and I mentioned several things that I was concerned about and discussed a least restrictive option to start. We knew throughout these discussions, and I know this has been a question from residents tonight, why didn't we do the improvements on Prairie first? That study had not been completed yet. It was pending. In the meantime, we had an accident on Forest and Prairie that occurred, I believe, on August 27th. And that pushed me to completely change my thought process, for better or worse. Completely changed it. I felt like I could not wait for that TAP study after an accident like that. And again, for better or for worse, that's what changed my mind. Now we have the study for Prairie in front of us, and we don't know how this council is going to vote. It is not up for a vote tonight. It will likely be up for a vote our next meeting to approve that. But I'm hopeful that we will move in a positive direction with those calming measures on Prairie. The study shows that the improvements would slow speeds and reduce volumes for the whole stretch of Prairie, which are contributing factors to the accidents at that intersection of Forest and Prairie. I know there's going to be people out there that say to me, I wanted 3 seasons of a closure, and I did. In that moment, I 100% wanted to see this through, wanted to see that closure happen. And I voted for the barricade. I was one of the people that originally said, let's do the stops. I'm good with that. The accident happened, and I wanted the barricade. And I'm owning all of those statements. I had absolutely no idea in that moment how this would affect the entire neighborhood. And what I see in front of me is a neighborhood where there's so much strife because of what's going on. And I'm really struggling with that. While I was previously concerned on August 3rd and August 17th about causing any other issues, I don't think I truly understood what this barricade would look like for the neighborhood as a whole. And now I think I have a better grasp of what that might be. So my current thoughts tonight are not entirely based on emails from residents that we've gotten, but also with the knowledge that the Prairie TAP report has been completed and shows a step in the right direction should the council choose to approve it. I've not turned my back on safety concerns. I want to make that very clear. I've rather gone back to my initial thoughts that I had our first two meetings prior to that crash, and this approach with the information before us. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Sure, Leslie?
I just want to make a clarifying statement. At one point, it was said that the numbers on prints more than doubled, and that's not accurate. The numbers on prints were 250 to 300, and they increased by about 150 to 200. So that is not more than doubling that.
Can we flip to page 16? I'm just reading off PowerPoint.
The math matters. It's not double.
Double would be
Yeah.
500 to 600, yeah. So
Okay,
we haven't more than doubled it, is what I'm saying.
gotcha. The data itself is on page 16.
Yeah,
We can
and
frame
also-
that any way we want, but
I also wanted to be clear that some of what pushed at least me to change wasn't necessarily the accident. We got a little bit more data drilled down into the number and percentage of accidents at that particular location versus other spots on Prairie. So I just kind of wanted to point out that that was also part of that timeline that happened.
sure.
Yeah, I too just want to make a clarifying statement that the last video accident had very little impact. It was one small set. I think the data that we drilled down into more accidents, I think multiple site visits on my own to actually see a lot of the sightline issues that we were clearly not going to be able to resolve was far more than the emotional decision based on a video that a resident sent in.
All right, let me give my 2 cents. Rich, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
When we talked about this last, my thoughts were that we ought to take one step at a time and see what the impact was. That we knew, as Nicole said, that the breast of Prairie Avenue was under consideration, and it seemed likely that changes made along Prairie Avenue would have an effect here as well. What do we actually know from what we've seen? We know that a barricade stops through traffic. I don't think that's really learning much. We also know that the stop signs substantially changed the speeds on Prairie Avenue. When Commissioner Jose makes the point that it resonates with me, that when we see the accidents and we consider 2 people have to make a mistake, it's like a redundancy thing. But what we can't sit here and say is that we know that the lack of accidents is a function of and only limited to the effect of the barricade. We just can't say it. We made 2 choices, we made 2 changes, and we don't know that. It is possible that the stop signs alone would eliminate the accidents, if the severity and frequency of accidents is the goal. If we're moving the goal, which I would suggest we are, when we focus on trying to drive certain volumes in certain areas, then I think it's an entirely different conversation that practically needs to restart and have, whether it's 23 permutations or more, a lot more with it. Because choosing to pick volumes that one of the 7 of us is comfortable with on any particular street is literally a never-ending thing across the community. You can find street after street after street where residents on that street wish their volumes were different. Guaranteed. We heard some of it anecdotally tonight, but it is just an absolute fact that the entire community has challenges with people wishing there was less traffic on their street, and those numbers vary wildly. You heard some of them tonight, anywhere from 150 cars to 2,000 cars on streets that are fundamentally the same street. Residential streets with quarter-acre lots and driveways that frequently. They are not different. So the idea that we're going to decide up here what makes volumes appropriate, it's not impossible. We could choose to run down that path, but I think it's way more than the intersection of Prairie and Forest, if that's the subject we want to take on. What we were trying to do was eliminate's a big word. We're trying to reduce the severity and frequency of accidents at the intersection of Forest and Prairie. That's what we were trying to do. We don't know if stop signs would accomplish that or not. We just don't. They seem to be useful at places like Washington, different sight lines. I'm sure Chris is going to remind me the sight lines are different there. Yeah, they are. There's stop signs all over town, and they're often the result of people wishing that we could control traffic more. I remain convinced that the right process for this group is to put the stop signs in only, measure some more, put the balance of the Prairie work in, measure some more, and if we've still got a problem, we're still here. Our team is still there. You can do a next least restrictive thing. Maybe it's a pork chop. You still got a problem, you can put a barricade in. But the thing is, these streets all function as part of a system. And it is, you don't have to feel good about it, you don't have to feel bad about it. It's just a fact that Forest Avenue is a street that drives a lot of traffic when there's no barricade because of its connection to downtown, just like Washington does, just like Maple does east-west, just like Prairie does east-west. They function as part of a system. So I'm not prepared to sit here and pick which piece of the system we want to change for some reason other than safety of an intersection. I'm just not. I wasn't before, and I remain in that position. I would like to see Greg's motion supported. I would like to see us put the stop signs in. I'd like to see us put the stop signs in on the balance of Prairie, and then keep monitoring the situation. That's where my mind was before, that's where it is now, and it's really a function of process. If we find out we still have an accident a month after we've got 4-way stop signs at 5 new intersections across a mile of street, then I guess we'll take the next step. That's where my mind is. I think, Rich, you wanted to say something else?
Yeah.
Can we speak again?
Maybe at some point, but not right now.
It's our turn right now. So, anyway, we got the report late this morning. I happened to have to download it at the White Sox game. I had to leave early, but it didn't really matter. They didn't need me there, obviously. And I've got my shirt under here, so. I know that we can't vote on this tonight because it would not be appropriate for Prairie, but I'd like at least to have a head nod from my colleagues that we'd be willing, if that passes, to put stop signs in right away on Prairie. I'm not satisfied with the results. I analyzed the traffic, and it's in my own mind. We diverted too much to Prince and Saratoga, that more than I was satisfied with. I didn't know what the magic number would have been, and it's just almost one of those things like, well, until you see the movie, you don't know how it's going to end. But I just tell you from my own feeling, I'm not satisfied with the result. Prince also has an LPDA issue, which creates flooding, and then as the cars go through that, the faster the cars are going and the more water that's on the street, the more it's going to end up where it doesn't belong, in people's yards, and hopefully not in their basements. You kind of look to expectations. Certainly when people move to a brick street, there's a certain expectation that comes to that. There's a certain expectation when you buy a house on an arterial street that there's just going to be a lot of traffic. And that's going to be a never-ending scenario, and that shows up in the cost that they have to pay for their homes. I would think there was some expectation from people on Forest that they were moving into a busy street. I don't think any one of them signed up for people speeding on their streets, the number of accidents, so I think we have to change that expectation. I like the fact that we have this placeholder. I guess I wouldn't be comfortable in removing the placeholder until I had some assurances that the replacement could be in place to cover that. And for me, it's the other stop signs on Prairie, because Prairie is the key, and the excess speed is the key. And I think if we make Prairie less comfortable for people to drive, maybe they'll go to Ogden Avenue. I happen to live in the southwest corner of Downers Grove, and many times I have to make the decision literally at my block if I'm going to go down Forest or if I'm going to go over to Belmont. You know, when I'm going to Good Sam or something like that. So I'd like some assurances that we're actually taking care of the people on Forest without messing up the people on Prince and Saratoga, the other brick streets.
Just a quick question. Saratoga is also a brick street, is that correct?
So, yeah.
So my comment to that again, as a reminder, the volume increase on Prince was at the low end of what Saratoga experienced prior to the closure. I don't think we're pushing traffic that way in any sort of significant volume, and I think it's important that as we decided to let the data tell us the story, and we're basing this once again, I think, on emotion, and we're creating this pendulous decision-making process on our council that is not instilling, I believe, a whole lot of confidence in our residents. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else? We normally do not take another round of public comment because we've had an hour and a half of it, and I suspect there's nothing new to be said. That said, I also don't want people leaving here feeling like they weren't heard. So we're going to limit ourselves here to one more round of comment. I'm expecting everybody to be succinct. I'd like you to think through, if you're going to repeat something that's already been said, we actually have heard it and listened. It's not just about disagreeing or arguing. If there's a new element that you'd like to add to the conversation, something we haven't thought of that you think is going to change an opinion up here, please go ahead and bring it forward. Keep it short.
When I moved down to Forest, there was not 2 apartment complexes that are there now. You built one just on the other, right at Forest at the railroad tracks. Did you do a study? Did you do a traffic study then to see what the impact was going to be on my street? No, you didn't. You opened up another set of complexes right on Forest in what you consider the business district on Forest. Did you do a count to see what the traffic impact would be on my street? No, you didn't. But now I've got all that traffic on my street, and I didn't move onto the street, onto that block when it had that much traffic. Did I live on that street when you closed the school drop-off at Prince and made that for buses only? No. Did you consider the impact on my street when all those cars, all those parents now were coming up my street to go to drop their kids off on Forest? No, you didn't. Now suddenly this is about volume. Or I'm sorry, now you're saying it's not about volume. Volume shouldn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter unless you've got 2,400 cars on your street, which, by the way, Councilman, we have been arguing for 20 years, and if you go back and read the minutes, you'll see that it was Forest Avenue that fought 20 years ago to get that street, the reduction, to force the traffic back on the main street. You gave us a no left turn sign. That's what you gave us, so that we could try to reduce the southbound traffic on our street. And guess what? You don't even enforce that. Your own videos show everybody turning left onto Forest off of Prairie. And by the way, Prince on the north end, they're not coming up, heading north on Prince because of our blockade. They're heading north on Prince because of the stop sign. Because as people travel east on Prairie and they see that stop sign and they want to get towards the school, they're going to turn left early before the stop sign. There's nothing to do with our barricade. The kids that are getting dropped off at the school, if the school is the goal, the route to get there is going to be irrelevant. The goal is the goal. They're going to get there however they want, whether they come through my barricade or not. This is about volume. You guys are all saying it, that the volume doesn't matter, right? We can change the designation of the street. Great. Well, why is Forest the one that has to bear all of that? There's no way to dole it out without that barricade. You can't put a gate there and say, okay, 10 of you go this way, 10 of you go this way, 10 of you go this way. No, they all come down Forest. You know what? I can't get out of my driveway at rush hour. Does anybody have that problem on Prince? No, because they've got 800 cars. over the course of a day. I've got 800 cars in the course of an hour during rush hour. I can't get out of my driveway. Now, you want to replace the barricade with a stop sign. So those 2,000 cars are now going to get stopped on whether there's traffic on Prairie or not. So now it's not going to be even moving traffic in front of my house. It's going to be a parking lot in front of my house. But you guys think that that's okay. We should have put the four-way stop. Your own people evaluated a four-way stop sign there and what would be the most effective. And your own people said the most effective way to control these issues was the dead end. So we put it in on a temporary basis. And now Prince Street comes and complains, or Saratoga comes and complains, and you're willing to completely listen to them in one meeting and remove the barricade. The barricade that was supposed to be there on a trial basis to evaluate where the traffic would go. And you're, well, you know what? I guess they're louder than we were on Forest. I guess we didn't have enough people show up on Forest because they all complained. And you put a motion, let's remove the barricade. And you're going to second that motion to remove the barricade. You haven't even done what your own people recommended to do, which was put the barricade in and then do an analysis. We've got 2 days of numbers that aren't even that bad. I would kill to have 500 or 600 cars on my street. If you could figure out a way to do that, take the barricade. I don't need it, but there is no way to do that. I either get 2,400 or zero. They get 300 or 600, they complain, shove it back on Forest. Not in my backyard, I guess, is the rule we're going to live by with this village council. Okay, if it doesn't affect you, then this is what we're going to do. Or we're just going to appease whoever comes in and speaks the longest. 20 years we've been doing this. You gave it to us for how many days to see if it would work, and you want to withdraw it now because they've got what your own studies say is an acceptable amount of traffic on their street. My traffic has never been acceptable. 2,400 cars has never been deemed an appropriate amount of traffic on a residential street. But because Prince and Saratoga has got an increase to below what is normal or what is
Steve.
acceptable,
All right. New information
we're
is
gonna go with that.
waning here.
Unbelievable.
New information, guys. Don't argue. Don't just argue with the last speaker.
All right, so new information. We not only are just up here arguing and complaining, we gave you, I don't know your name, but we came with an idea, you know, like we're going to help you, right?
Yep.
So, I don't know.
Yes, we passed it on to the.
Oh, okay.
We
Okay,
circulated
I didn't see it go on, but I can't take credit for it. One of my neighbors did it, and it's to help Forest too, and the people on 47th, you know, going north. It's going to divert, and we agree, get them back on the main artery. So we on Prince are trying to help our neighbors and do the neighborly thing. Remember last month, neighborly thing? And we're giving you guys an idea. I think it's a great idea. I think it's going to help them with their 2,400. He moved here 20 years ago. He didn't sign up for that either. I mean, you know, I feel for him, but hey, we're trying to help you guys too. We came up with some ideas to give them, not me, some brilliant people that live on my block.
Okay.
So we're here to help you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's getting late. I appreciate y'all staying late this evening. So 2 new bits of information. I think what's very apparent from residential support and who this is directly impacting, the only proponents of the dead end are the people on the 4800 block of Forest. It has consequentially impacted the rest of the community, including residents of Forest that are north of it that don't support it either. So keep that in mind for who you are hearing from that are actually supporting this dead-end existence. And the other point that was very prominent to me that I heard earlier was Washington and Prairie, and the amount of traffic crossing the tracks, of course, from Washington and going north to Ogden. Those volume numbers, if we are talking volume and what's acceptable, let's look at what those numbers are. If any study has been made of Washington, and we know that if it's roughly the same as what Forest is experiencing, it's again not a shock because of the railroad tracks. Thank you.
Thanks.
Tom Schroeder, Forest Avenue. I definitely have way too much to speak about, so I'm just going to answer a couple of things here. The difference on 3,000 cars on Washington, I was the one that sent the email to you that donated a chunk of my life the last couple of weeks. You can't compare Washington, unfortunately, because they have no line of sight issue. Okay, there's two things that come into it, and they don't have that same line of sight issue. I am friends with the Brenners and Robin and Danielle. When Danielle moved away 4 years ago, I gave her a book on Downers Grove. First book she pulled out when she got back was the Downers Grove book. I love my town. I want to do what's right by it. We on Forest do not know anybody, and the reason that this was put out there was because of the dangerous and excessive number of accidents. Steve said that there was 2,400 cars. That was not entirely accurate. Those numbers have spiked up to 2,400 over the last 10 years because of not 2 developments, but 5 new developments that have gone in. A parking deck, increased parking on the Burlington. I love this, a new medical building for us, a workout facility that I use. The Economic Development Board has been wildly successful, and 6 new restaurants. All of these things are bringing in new cut traffic. I have spoken with the garbage men, the FedEx men, the postal carriers, USPS, various Amazon drivers. Do they like it? No, they don't like it. But when I tell them what happened with this intersection, they all say, you know what? It takes 30 seconds or a minute. That's fine. And if this remains dead-ended, we're going to have a turnaround in there, so it's not even going to affect them anymore. I like my neighbors, like I said. I sat next to Mark at a football game, and he tweaked my interest in, if we keep this, how is it affecting our neighbors? So I asked neighbors all the way from Oakwood, Linscott, Saratoga, Prince, 4700 block, which is where Mark lives, and the only 2 streets that seem to have an issue with this is 47 and 4800 Prince and Saratoga. So I said, where's this traffic coming from? Like, I'm going to concentrate just on 4800 for now. Where's it coming from? I literally did hour-by-hour studies over a 2-week period, 25 hours worth, and I came up with 627 cars. And I started those numbers the week before you guys did your 2 days of counts, which is why my numbers are a little bit higher. And as people get used to their new traffic patterns, the numbers are continuing to come down. You're down to 550 now. I was at 627. If that's not enough, let me sidetrack here. So you're talking about percentages. If you go from 2 to 4, that's a 100% increase. It's dramatic, right? You need to look at counts itself. And I don't have the answer. And I'm not sure any of us have the answer. But if you look at what a normal residential street should have, it's 500 to 1,000. And your push periods per hour should not be 10%, more than 10% of that total. Okay? So if I said that the Prince 4800 was 629, it's really 550, and it continues to go down as things get calmed, I've shown you how we can put a right turn only at Forest and Franklin and get rid of another 188 cars. Okay? That'll bring the numbers down significantly. That brings you down to 383. If that's still not enough, we can put a no left turn sign at Prairie and Prince and get it down to 341. 341, that's way under the 500 to 1,000. Okay? Mark brought up a good point. Now in the morning, there's about 45 minutes in the morning, during the morning push, where I observed people going eastbound on Prairie, and now because of the parking, the stop sign there are some days when you have pushback and some days you don't, but there have been some days where people are getting backed up and they don't want to sit in line just to turn left and go north up Forest. So they're turning north and going up Prince Street. So if you keep it at a dead end, I do think you might consider removing the stop signs, which will let the traffic flow. It won't back up on Main Street. It won't back up. People won't be going north on Prince. But again, the percentages, I think you need to throw the percentages out. Look at the total volume of traffic. And if 500 to 1,000 is normal, and we're at 550 now, is that normal? And I'm not saying it's fair to have our street at 0. But again, we started this whole thing, and the correct number of accidents to date is actually 39 accidents. And there's been 11 accidents in the last 12 months, okay? That's escalating. We're exponential now. So I could go on and on with stats, but you've read my long email, hopefully. Again, I spent 25 hours. I did that to myself. I got yelled at by my wife, and I didn't finish work, but that's fine. I wanted to try to make peace with everybody, do the right thing. But again, if you hear nothing else than what I'm saying right now is your own people told you to do something, you voted on it, you did it, and now we're in the middle of a manager's report, and now we're potentially ripping this up
in 2.5 weeks of testing without at least going through one more cycle, I guarantee if you put up a right turn there or you start adding more of these things, stop signs, you're going to have far, far fewer cars on Saratoga and Oakwood. And I just don't understand why you'd even bring this up to vote before you have all the data. That is all I have to say, unless you have any questions for my report. Thank you.
All right, last one, guys. I'm cutting it off.
I just wanted to reiterate what you were talking about, Rich, about the speeds. The 28 miles per hour was north of Prairie, which is what I mentioned on Forest, according to your guys' documentation. So I just wanted to get that clear. It was actually lower on the south side. So just to get that clear. And as the mayor alluded to, like, you guys are opening a can of worms, right? You're kind of picking and choosing winners here. There are lots of streets where people can't back out of their driveways. It's not just Forest, right? I mean, try backing out on Main Street. Like, think of those people. What should those people do? What about Prairie? What about Curtis Street? When I lived on there, backing out with traffic, all those people trying to make it from the southwest corner into the parking lot. Like, we're picking winners and losers here. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I get the sight lines, but if you have multiple stops, put another stop sign at Prairie, where that accident you guys talked about won't happen. Sure, it'll be super congested. You could put a speed bump in between that. But as you said before, Mayor, like, you don't care if the traffic jams happen because that means people are obeying the laws. Like, I just don't understand how we're picking this one situation. Soon 10 other people on the street are going to petition to get a cul-de-sac in their end. And then what are you going to do? They're going to bring up this situation.
Okay. Is there anybody else in the council that wants to weigh in?
We have another.
I think we've gone past learning new information, guys. Chris?
Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, I would still like to revisit the whole idea of improving that light at Franklin and Main Street to make that easier. I know that's why people are typically doing that cut through. I think we discarded that idea too soon.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah. So I think, given the fact that, again, the data is very, very new, only as of this morning, we're just looking at it clearly. I'm not sure that there is a segment of our residents who are aware that we potentially could be removing the barricade tonight. I think I'd like to make a motion that we table the motion to remove the barrier until November 9th to give us a little more time with the data. Will give us another opportunity to take a look at that, give us just a little more breathing room. I'm just still not sure why we're trying to, in my opinion, push this through tonight.
All right, there's a motion to table. Is there a second?
Second.
For those of us watching and wondering what's going on here, there's a motion to table. The motion is considered without additional conversation and debate. So we're going to consider that motion. Rosa, would you call a roll on that motion?
Commissioner Gilmartin,
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit,
Aye.
Commissioner Glover,
Nay.
Commissioner Colavani,
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace,
Nay.
Commissioner Jose,
Nay.
Mayor Barnett.
Nay, that motion fails. Additional conversation on the original motion.
Yeah,
Danny, please.
yeah. No, my position remains the same on this. I believe that the action to couple this with the four-way stop with the new information from the new report that we got for the whole section of Prairie is the right way to approach it. Put the four-way stop in, as well as the other stop signs. I think Commissioner Colavani expressed concern about doing this all at the same time before removing the barriers, which I would agree with. And now that we've seen the study and recommendations, I feel like that this council can adequately address the safety concerns of the whole neighborhood without interfering with the greater community's way of moving throughout the town. So this is why I support this, and hopefully we can all make everybody happy in this neighborhood.
Even though we're not voting on it, I would like to hear the other commissioners' support for putting those other stop signs in right away. Just as a verbal comment.
Anyone want to touch on that?
Commissioner Glover.
I believe I already said that, yeah.
Yep. Greg?
Hey, I'd go and pound them in myself if I could.
Thank you.
Absolutely agree.
Thank you. Mayor?
You're getting a lot of head nods, Rich.
Okay, good.
Rosa, would you please read back the motion as it stands so we're all clear?
The original
The
motion?
original motion.
The motion to remove barricades at Forest and Prairie.
Thank you.
And
And install a four-way stop. The
Okay.
motion is drafted is remove the barrier and install a four-way stop.
Okay.
We got 3 right now, right? Okay, Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Nay.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski Fugit?
Nay.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion passes 5-2.
We also got some informal direction from the council tonight during the first reading discussion of the plan on Prairie, and I did take note of the concern about timing of the interrelationship between additional stop signs on Prairie and the motion that was just passed. So staff will provide an update on the timing of the implementation of the motion that just passed at our next meeting. We will also try to figure out how we handle further discussion on the Prairie plan and allow for further development of those ideas and concepts, especially along the west portion, while there seems to be some consensus for at least the stop signs on the east portion. So we've got a little bit of work to do to try to coordinate these things, and we appreciate the policy direction provided from the council tonight. And that ends my report.
Thank you, Dave. Attorney's report, Enza.
Thank you, Mayor. Only one item, actually 2 items I'll present tonight, just in case. The first one is an ordinance authorizing the payment of the redevelopment project costs, dissolving the special tax allocation fund, and terminating the Village of Downers Grove tax increment downtown redevelopment project area. And the second is an ordinance amending certain traffic control provisions along Prairie Avenue. Thank you, Mayor. That is all.
Thank you. Item 12 on our agenda is council member reports. This is the portion of our meeting where council members report out on other goings-on in the community or agencies or groups they're part of or in touch with. So we'll start this with Danny.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Chris.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Right.
Real quick, Mayor, I hadn't planned on saying anything, but since the EDC agreement was brought up and I happen to be the EDC liaison, I thought I'd take a second to comment for anybody who might actually still be watching and recalls those comments from the top. The EDC operating agreement, we made a number of changes along the way that included giving the village voting members for the first time on the board and not just ad hoc members. We have increased accountability now because they're coming to us for budget requests, where in the past they had been tied to the hotel tax, which if we had kept them tied to the hotel tax back in 2020, things might not have gone very well for them, as the hotel industry really was about a half step short of collapse. And the EDC has performed at a pretty high level for us. So I think the agreement was all in a very good thing. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Colavani.
Yeah, the Downers Grove Historical Society is presenting their Historian of the Year Award to Marilyn Ludwig at 1 p.m. at the Lincoln Center on Saturday from 1 to 2 p.m. So public is invited. You can just go on the Downers Grove Historical websites to reserve tickets.
Thank you, Rich. Leslie?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but this is finally the week that Youth Outlook is opening its drop-in center at the First United Methodist Church. It is happening for teens age 12 to 20. And anyone is welcome. Drop-in center is open between 6:30 and 9 p.m.
Thank you. Nicole?
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
I have no report either. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all and good night.